Chapter 1, Trapped. Where am I? This place, the air, the landscape, the atmosphere, everything about this particular place was unfamiliar to the boy. After getting up from the grass from which he woke up laying, he took a long hard look at his surroundings, and proceeded to pinch himself. After feeling the pain of stretching the skin on his cheekbone, almost beyond their limit, the situation he was in began to sink in. The boy didn't say a word after that. He began to wander. I wander, and wander. Upon hearing the impact of a large white frothy cascade of water falling into a plunged pool, he soon got closer to the waterfall, and soon realized what fell from that waterfall wasn't water, it was more like a green flowing liquid, and it let off a persistent glow. Around the waterfall were beautiful greenery, trees, grass, moss, slippery rocks, and strange creatures unknown to the boy. It was almost enchanting. The fantastical construct in display before him reassured him of his previous realization. He had somehow been transported to another world. The sound of light thuds, resounding on the earth and grass coming from the forest alarmed him, but for some reason he was curious to see what made those sounds. He continued on the path where the sounds came from, and to his surprise, he met 7 individuals all looking like fellow Japanese. It seems he wasn't the only one. End of prologue. A mirror. Yes, a mirror. 2 girls whispered an urban legend as they strolled past the park, their voices barely audible over the rustling of leaves. They say that when people reach a certain level of despair, a mirror appears to them, drawing them in with an otherworldly allure. Once they're entranced, they're pulled into the mirror's depths and transported to the mirror realm, where they must confront unspeakable terrors, like living through a never-ending nightmare. Eh? That's ridiculous. Is that really what they're telling kids these days? I know, right? The girls' conversation faded into the distance, leaving behind an unsettling silence. In a secluded corner of the park, a young man with dark hair and dark eyes sat motionless on a bench, shrouded in the shade. His eyes seemed empty, devoid of emotion as he clutched his favorite novel in his hands wore a school uniform, but showed no signs of leaving the bench, as if time itself had forgotten him. The air around him was heavy with an aura of melancholy, and the trees seemed to lean in, as if listening to his unspoken thoughts. The morning sunlight cast a pale glow over the park, a familiar backdrop to Ryo Kobayashi's daily routine. A student at Haruki Senior High, Ryo had grown accustomed to delaying his departure for school, lingering in the park as he watched people hurry by. Another sight I'm forced to see. He thought, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm getting tired of doing these mundane things. He tilted his head back, gazing up at the sky as if searching for a reprieve, but he knew it was futile. With a resigned sigh, he stood up, acknowledging the inevitability of his daily routine. As he walked to school, he caught glimpses of people approaching him from the sidewalk. Their faces, however, were a blur, a sea of inflated red balloons, devoid of features or distinction. To Ryo, humans were nothing more than anonymous, faceless entities, their individuality reduced to the clothes they wore. It was a peculiar affliction, one that had become his norm, and he had learned to navigate the world with this distorted perception. I bet they're staring, I'm sure they are, Ryo thought to himself, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his mind. But it doesn't matter anyway. I'm the main character of my world, and I shouldn't have to adjust to others. This was the mantra he had convinced himself to believe, a coping mechanism to deal with the isolation that came with his peculiar affliction. He had given up trying to connect with others, and instead, focused on navigating his own world, where he was the sole protagonist. At school, it was more of the same. He walked through the corridors, a sea of faceless balloons passing him by, their voices a distant hum. As he approached his classroom, he slid open the door and stepped inside, where a room full of inflated red balloons awaited him. The teacher, a grumpy old man, balloon person, as Ryo referred to him, glared at him over the rim of his reading glasses. You're late again, Kobayashi. He barked. His voice like a loud, annoying squeak to Ryo's ears. Ryo winced, feeling a surge of irritation. Does he have to be so loud, he thought, rolling his eyes. It's not like I can take a talking balloon seriously, anyway. Ryo settled into his seat at the edge of the class, closest to the window, where he could gaze outside and tune out the lesson. His classmates had long since alienated him, but he didn't let it bother him. The NPC characters shouldn't affect how I live my life, he thought, using his own personal terminology to describe the people around him. To him, they were just non-player characters, insignificant and unimportant. As the class drew to a close, Ryo packed up his things and headed to his locker, lost in his own thoughts. But his solitude was short-lived, as 3 individuals, a guy and 2 girls, approached him, laughing and chatting. One of them, the guy, bumped into Ryo, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Ryo felt a jolt of surprise, but the guy's gaze was quickly replaced with a scowl. "You're in the way," he muttered, before pushing Ryo down and continuing on his way, the two girls giggling and following close behind. "Nobody needs a depressed mob like you," the guy called out over his shoulder, his words dripping with malice. Ryo didn't even bother to look up, he simply stood up, dusted himself off, and continued on his way home, unfazed by the encounter. Ryo didn't let them penetrate the guy's words were just background noise, meaningless and insignificant, and of indifference. As Ryo walked into his house, he met with an atmosphere that was as stiff as a board. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was oppressive. His family, seated around the dinner table, looked like strangers to him, their faces devoid of warmth or connection, but at least he could see and perceive them as people. His parents, with their perfectly polished facades, seemed more like mannequins than flesh and blood people. His younger sister, Amy, a middle schooler with a spark of rebellion in her eyes, was the only one who seemed to have a pulse. The meal was a cold, awkward affair, with each person responding to the others in monosyllables, their words as dry as the food on their plates. It was as if they were all just going through the motions, playing their roles in a script that had been written by someone else. The mother, a beautiful woman with long dark hair and crimson-red eyes, attempted to break the ice, her voice like a gentle breeze on a summer's day. "So, how was your day, Ryo dear?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. Ryo's response was as flat as the tone of the meal. As usual, completely uneventful and nothing out of the ordinary. Amy glared at him, her eyes flashing with anger, as if she wanted to point out something, but her words were cut off by their father, who had been silent until now. The father's voice was like a thunderclap, loud and judgmental, as he launched into a tirade about Ryo's social awkwardness. "Where do you think you're going? We haven't had that chat about your future yet. I want you to be social enough so you can actually be a man of value when you get older. You were supposed to be like your old man. I don't understand why your mom gave birth to some socially awkward brat." Ryo's face remained impassive, his eyes glazing over as he tuned out the lecture. He had heard it all before, and it was nothing new. He quietly got up from the table, his movements economical and precise, and made his way up the stairs to his room, locking the door behind him. The sound of his father's muffled, but Ryo could still feel the weight of his disapproval, like a physical presence in the but Ryo was used to it, and it didn't bother him. He had long since learned to tune out the noise, to retreat into his own world, where he was safe from the judgments and expectations of others. Ryo's disdain for his family burned deep within him. He loathed his obnoxious, stuck-up sister, who always seemed to find fault in everything he did. Mother, with her criticism and pretentious acceptance of his flaws. His was just as bad. Then there's Sher's father, who ruled with an iron fist, beating his mother and forcing his own ideals on others. Ryo had long since concluded that humans and it was a wonder he could even tolerate their presence. Perhaps it was this deep-seated hatred that had rendered him unable to see other people's faces, reducing them to mere blobs of featureless flesh. As he gazed around his room, he felt a sense of comfort wash over him. The posters of his favorite characters and the merchandise from his beloved novels were a reminder that they're nowhere to life than the drudgery of his daily existence. His bed, in particular, was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape into his own fictional world and process his thoughts. "I feel like I'm trapped in this endless cycle," he thought, his mind numb with despair. "I wake up, I go to school, I come back to this horrible place, I get chewed out, I repeat it, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat these actions over and over again. There's no substance to my being, I have no hopes for the future. Maybe I should just quietly die." The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but he knew he couldn't give up yet. He still had to finish reading Moonlit Night, his favorite novel. Just as he was starting to drift off into his own little world, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from his boss, reminding him that he had to go to work. The sun had only just set, and the night was still young. "That's right, I have my part-time job too," he thought, a sense of resignation washing over him. He would have to put his thoughts of escape on hold, at least for now. He slipped on his jacket, a thin layer of protection against the cold weather that would soon settle in. "I'm heading out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His mom's response was automatic, a habitual farewell that held little warmth. "Be safe, and don't come back too late," Ryo nodded, already distant, as he stepped out into the night. At work, the routine was numbingly familiar. He stood behind the cash register, a cog in the machine of a convenience store. A man came to the register, complaining about something, but Ryo's mind had already wandered. He felt lightheaded, disconnected from the world around him. He looked at the men, his eyes unfocused, and began to bow, again and again, a mechanical apology. The shift dragged on, ever-ending cycle of monotony. Finally, it was over, and Ryo headed back into the night. The pale crescent moon hung in the sky, a silvery claw that seemed to reach out and snatch at the stars. The city lights distant, a hum of activity that barely penetrated the darkness. The silence was broken only by the distant barking of dogs, a mournful sound that echoed through the night. Ryo walked, his feet carrying him forward on autopilot. He was still dizzy, his mind foggy, and he stumbled slightly as he walked. Suddenly, he was confronted by a group of alley thugs, their faces twisted with cruel intent. They pulled back his jacket, and Ryo felt a surge of pain as they beat him to a pulp. They took his money, his cell phone, and left him lying in the dirt. But Ryo's expression didn't change, even as he struggled to his feet. He was numb, devoid of emotion, a shell of a person. He began to walk, his feet carrying him forward, even as his mind wandered. He missed the path that led to his home, but he kept walking, driven by some unknown force. And then, he stumbled across something that made his heart skip a beat. A dark mirror, with an ancient framework, stood in the middle of the road. It was an object that seemed out of place, a thing that didn't belong in this world. But as Ryo approached, he felt a strange sense of connection, a sense of being drawn towards it. The mirror illuminated a dim light, a soft glow that seemed to call to him. Ryo walked forward, his feet moving of their own accord, and with each step, his consciousness began to fade. He was being pulled towards the mirror, drawn into its depths, and he couldn't resist. The world around him grew darker, the stars twinkling like diamonds in the sky, and Ryo felt himself being sucked into the abyss, a vortex of darkness that seemed to have no end. Chapter 2: Awakening in a New World. As Ryo's consciousness slowly returned, he felt a peculiar heaviness in his limbs, as if his body was anchored to the ground. He cracked open his eyes, wincing at the faint haze that clouded his vision. Groggily, he struggled to gather his thoughts, his mind foggy and disoriented. The world around him was a blur, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been asleep for an eternity. But as his senses began to clear, a flurry of questions assaulted his mind. What was he doing on the ground? How did he get there? And why did he feel like he'd been lost in a deep slumber for so long? The uncertainty was suffocating, and Ryo's thoughts swirled with a growing sense of unease as he tried to piece together the fragments of his memories. What is going on? Where am I? As Ryo stood up and took his first tentative steps, he scanned his surroundings with a growing sense of unease. Everything he saw was unfamiliar, a jarring landscape of strange rocks, twisted trees, and eerie, pulsing plants. The air was thick with an otherworldly silence, broken only by the gentle hum of insect-like creatures that flitted about him. Their transparent skin was a mesmerizing sight, revealing intricate networks of veins and organs beneath, and their delicate, wing-like appendages glimmered in the faint light. But Ryo's fascination was tempered by his deep-seated aversion to insects. He shuddered at the thought of their tiny, spindly legs touching his skin, and the way their multiple eyes seemed to watch him with an unblinking, alien intelligence. To him, these creatures were not fascinating, but repellent, and he couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread as they danced around him, their very presence seeming to underscore his own disorientation and isolation. Ryo meandered through the unfamiliar landscape, drawn to a forest that loomed near the grassy plain where he had awoken. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sky above was still locked in a perpetual twilight, the sun nowhere to be seen. And then, he saw them, 3 moon-like celestial bodies, their faint glow casting an eerie light over the landscape. Ryo's heart quickened as he struggled to process this strange new world. He pressed on, his footsteps quiet on the soft earth, as he tried to clear his mind of the questions swirling inside. But the silence was short-lived, as the sound of splashing water drifted through the air, beckoning him deeper into the forest. The plants around him seemed to be watching, their leaves twitching and swaying in response to his presence. They reacted to every step, every movement, as if they were alive and wary of his intrusion. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and Ryo couldn't help but feel like he was being pulled into a world that was fundamentally hostile to human presence. But what struck Ryo as even more unsettling was that the plants in the area where the sound seemed to be coming from behaved with eerie normalcy. Unlike the twitching, sentient-like foliage he had encountered earlier, these plants stood still and silent, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. It was as if they were deliberately trying to appear non-threatening, which only added to Ryo's growing unease. Despite his reservations, his curiosity got the better of him, and he pressed on, following the sound to its source. The path led him to a breathtaking sight, a waterfall that defied explanation. Instead of cascading water, a vibrant, green glowing liquid plunged down from above, its radiance intensifying as Ryo approached. The spectacle was mesmerizing, and Ryo found himself transfixed by the liquid's ethereal glow. But his wonder was short-lived, as the sounds of rustling and footsteps echoed through the forest, growing louder with each passing moment. The noise seemed to be coming from downstream, and Ryo's instincts told him that whatever was making that sound was heading straight for him. Ryo's curiosity wrestled with his fear as he hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The unknown sounds drew him in, but his mind was flooded with cautionary tales from the fantasy novels he had devoured. He recalled the countless stories of brave heroes who had ventured into the unknown, only to be torn apart by ferocious beasts. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, and for a moment, he wondered if he was making a grave mistake. But his desire for answers and his need to take control of his situation propelled him forward. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, frustration and anxiety etched on his face. "I have no idea where I am, or how I got here. This is insane. How am I supposed to deal with whatever is out there?" The questions swirled in his mind, but he steeled himself and took a deep breath, deciding to face whatever lay ahead, no matter how daunting it seemed. Ryo's feet came to a halt as his mind wandered back to the last memories he had of his own world. He recalled the mundane routine of his shift, but everything after that was a blur. One image stood out with crystal clarity, the dark, enchanting mirror. Its presence lingered in his mind, taunting him with its mystery. A mirror, of all things. He thought, puzzled by the significance of the image. What could it possibly mean? He tried to shake off the feeling of unease, attempting to console himself with hollow words of encouragement. "It's not so bad, really. No more dealing with people's prying eyes, no more suffocating under their judgmental gazes. It's almost liberating." But the words rang empty to his own ears. Deep down, he knew he wasn't fooling himself. The sense of disconnection, the feeling of being an outsider, it all still there, lingering beneath the surface. The only difference was that he alone with his thoughts, with no one to share his burdens or offer a comforting word. The solitude was a double-edged sword, bringing both relief and despair in equal measure. As Ryo emerged into the clearing, the rustling noises ceased, and an unsettling silence fell over the forest. A prudent person would have hesitated, weighing the risks and uncertainties of the situation, but Ryo pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and trepidation. 7 pairs of eyes snapped towards him, their gazes piercing and intense. For a moment, they seemed to hold their collective breath, startled by the sudden appearance of a stranger. But as they took in Ryo's disheveled yet unmistakably human form, their expressions transformed from alarm to relief. "It's a human," one of them whispered, the words barely audible, the sound of their own ragged breathing. "An otherworlder, like us." A tall, imposing figure stepped forward, his chiseled features and athletic build exuding an aura of quiet confidence. His eyes, a deep, piercing brown, locked onto Ryo's, and a small, reassuring smile played on his lips. "We thought we'd encountered some kind of monster," he said, his voice low and smooth, as he approached Ryo with a calm, deliberate stride. You look Japanese," the man said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Ryo's features. "Did you also get transported here?" Ryo's eyes widened in surprise, his mind reeling from the sudden realization that he wasn't alone in this strange new world. Just moments before, he had been bemoaning the fact that he wouldn't have to deal with people, and now, here they were. It was a sobering reminder that he wasn't as special as he thought, and that his situation was perhaps not as unique as he had assumed. But what really caught his attention was the fact that he could see their faces with perfect clarity. It was a jarring contrast to his own world, where faces were often a rubber balloon. "Just my luck," he muttered, letting out a sigh as he took in the group before him. There were 3 males and 4 females, most of whom wore the same school uniform he did. But 2 individuals stood out, who had spoken to him, and a woman who stood behind him, her eyes fixed intently on Ryo. "Yes, I'm from Japan," Ryo replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes sparkled with excitement as he looked around at the group, his gaze lingering on each person before he clapped his hands together, a look of determination etched on his face. "All right, let's get down to business," he said, his voice filled with a sense of purpose. "Since we're all strangers here, with no memories of how or why we arrived, let's break the ice by introducing ourselves." Akamitsu suggested, "This is it, nice to meet you." "And inviting." "Teal start." "I'm Akamitsu." The others nodded in agreement, but Ryo remained seated on the floor, his eyes fixed on the group with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. He seemed to be waiting for anyone else to make the first move, his expression unreadable. The silence was broken by a soft, hesitant voice. My name is Akari Hana. A beautiful young girl stammered, her long brown hair falling around her like a curtain. Her blue eyes darted nervously around the group, avoiding eye contact, but she stood tall, her slender legs trembling slightly. Beneath her. Despite her obvious nervousness, she had been the first to respond, and the others smiled encouragingly at her. Next to speak was Hitomi Higashi, a stunning young woman with a confident air about her. Hitomi Higashi, nice to meet you, even if we are in this crappy situation, she said, her voice husky and self-assured. Her red hair cascaded down her back, and her yellow eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. She folded her hands beneath her chest, accentuating her hourglass waistline, and smiled sweetly at the group. Finally, a boy with a friendly face spoke up. Koki Matsumoto, nice to meet you, he exclaimed, his eyes locking onto Ryo's with a warm smile. There was something familiar about his face, and Ryo felt a pang of recognition, as if they might have crossed paths before. HK. The boy's enthusiastic greeting was met with a mixture of disdain and disinterest from Ryo, who felt a surge of discomfort at the sudden attention. In his old world, he had grown accustomed to avoiding social interactions, unable to connect with others or even recall their faces. So, when the boy claimed to have met him before, Ryo was skeptical, unsure of how to respond. Ryo Kobayashi, nice to meet you, he muttered, his tone lukewarm. At best. The truth was, Ryo wasn't thrilled about this unexpected turn of events, and he felt trapped, with no clear purpose or destination in mind. Just as he was starting to feel overwhelmed, a melodious voice cut through the awkwardness. Tsukiko Aoki, nice to meet you, she said, her smile radiant and warm. The woman who introduced herself was a vision of loveliness, with a youthful energy that belied her mid-20s age. Her supermodel physique was sleek and toned, with curves that were both feminine and alluring. Her golden eyes sparkled with a hint of warmth, and her tawny brown hair cascaded down her back in luscious waves, framing her heart-shaped face. Every inch of her skin seemed to glow with a sun-kissed perfection, leaving no doubt that she was a true beauty. As she smiled, her entire face lit up, and Ryo found himself momentarily stunned, unsure of how to react to such breathtaking loveliness. As the introductions continued, a boy with an unmistakable air of refinement stepped forward, his chiseled features and poised demeanor commanding attention. Kenzo Mori, pleased to make your acquaintance, he said, his voice smooth as silk, as he bowed his head slightly. His distinctive dim gray hair was perfectly styled, and his striking dodger blue eyes sparkled with a hint of warmth, lending him an undeniable aura of sophistication and charm. He exuded the confident elegance of someone born to mingle with the aristocracy, and Ryo couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration for the boy's polished appearance. Next to introduce herself was Mei Arakawa, a girl who stood with an ethereal elegance, her pale skin seeming almost translucent in the faint light. Her raven-black hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall of night, framing her heart-shaped face with of mystery. Her eyes, two glittering onyx stones, gleamed with a cold, detached intensity, as if they held 1,000 secrets and rose within their dark depths. Despite the frosty demeanor, her features undeniably beautiful. Delicate, refined, and hauntingly lovely, like a winter moon shining bright in a midnight sky. Her very presence seemed to command attention, drawing the eye like a magnet, even as her chilly reserve warned others to keep their distance. Ryo felt an inexplicable pull towards her, as if there was something lily in a cage. Chapter 2, Awakening in a New. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he was drawn to her like a moth to a flame, and he found himself wondering what secrets lay beneath her icy exterior. But before he could ponder this further, a blinding light appeared in front of them, interrupting his thoughts and sending him stumbling backward. It seems the pieces I summoned are all here, a voice said, the light coalescing into a white creature that hovered above them. The creature was unlike anything Ryo had ever seen. It had the appearance of a drawn humanoid beast, with a cute yet scary face, and wings that stretched out from its back like a ghostly appendage. Now let's begin the ritual, it said. Its voice like a soft chime, and Ryo felt a shiver run down his spine as he wondered what lay ahead. Chapter 3, Survival in the Mirror Realm. The group stood in stunned silence, their minds reeling from the creature's sudden ability to speak. Aetherion's grand appearance was certainly impressive, but it was its voice that truly caught their attention. The tone was grating, like nails on a chalkboard, yet it was laced with an unsettling playfulness that made every ear it reached want to shut it out. Despite the initial shock, they found themselves drawn in, forced to listen as Aetherion's words etched themselves into their hearts and minds like a violation. I'm Aetherion, merely a messenger for my master. The creature introduced itself, its expression twisted into a devilish grin. You see, you lilies were each selectively handpicked by my master, the grand narrator. The term lilies hung in the air, and Ryo's eyes narrowed as he felt a shiver run down his spine. It couldn't be a coincidence that they used the same term he had always associated with himself. Back in his world, he had adored lilies, drawn to their lonely beauty and the way they seemed detached from others. He had even kept a flower pot with a lily in his room, placing it by the window so it could bask in the sunlight. Aetherion's voice cut through Ryo's thoughts, its irritating tone making him wince. We call you lilies because of the significance of the flower. You're all alone in your own little worlds, and when you reach your limits, you begin to wither and emit strong emotions. That's when I take notice of your existence, and I decide whether you're worthy of being part of the ritual. The creature's grin grew wider, its eyes glinting with malevolence. If I deem you fit, you get summoned to the mirror realm. And that's where you are now. Ryo's gaze met Akimitsu's, and he saw a flicker of understanding there. They were both thinking the same thing. This was no coincidence. The grand narrator had chosen them for a reason, and Aetherion's words only added to the mystery. Aetherion continued, its voice dripping with excitement. You're part of the 4th chapter, and you'll have to complete a lot of pages challenges and objectives that can be either very dangerous or mild. Complete a considerable amount, and you might just appease my master. If you succeed in earning his favor, he'll grant each of you a single wish. Most people wish to return home, but some wish to build upon something in this world. And then there are those who make peculiar wishes. The creature's grin grew even wider, its eyes sparkling with anticipation. Do your best to entertain me and my master. I'm sure it will be enlightening. As Aetherion finished speaking, the group exchanged uneasy glances. They knew they had to work together if they wanted to survive, but the creature's words had planted seeds of doubt and fear in their minds. What lay ahead, and what would be the cost of their wishes? Only time would tell. Akimitsu's eyes blazed with anger and fear as he spat out his words. What is this? Why are you doing this? He took a step forward, his fists clenched, but Aetherion didn't flinch. The creature regarded him with a tilted head, its expression a mixture of confusion and amusement. Don't get ahead of yourself, human. It said with a light grin. You were all chosen because I sensed a deep-seated desire for change within you. You wanted to escape your situations, to break free from the chains that bound you. Ryo, who had been quietly observing the exchange, spoke up in a flat, emotionless tone. What's the point of any of this? He asked, his eyes gazing blankly at the floor. We're all just going to end up back where we started, anyway. Aetherion's gaze shifted to Ryo, and its grin grew wider. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Ryo. It said, its voice dripping with an unsettling enthusiasm. You see, I've brought you all here for a reason. You each have a unique set of circumstances that has driven you to this point. And I'm offering you a chance to change that. Tsukiko, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of concern and curiosity, spoke up. What do you mean by circumstances? She asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Aetherion's grin faltered for a moment, and it regarded Tsukiko with a curious expression. Ah, Tsukiko, you want to know the specifics, don't you? It said. Very well, I'll indulge you. You and Akimitsu, for example, have a certain history, don't you? The creature's eyes seemed to gleam with amusement, and Akimitsu's face darkened with anger. Mei Arakawa, who had been standing at the edge of the group, her eyes fixed on some point beyond Aetherion's shoulder, spoke up in a cold, detached tone. I don't see the point of dwelling on the past, she said. We're here now. Let's focus on survival. Kenzo Mori, who had been observing the exchange with an air of confident elegance, nodded in agreement. I concur, he said. We should focus on listening to what the creature is trying to explain. Koki Matsumoto, who had been eyeing Ryo with a curious expression, spoke up. Hey, Ryo, don't you remember me? He asked, his voice tinged with a hint of excitement. Ryo's expression didn't change, but he raised an eyebrow. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Akari Hana, who had been standing at the edge of the group, her eyes fixed on the floor, spoke up in a nervous, stammering tone. I don't understand what's going on, she said. Can someone explain it to me? Hitomi Higashi, who had been watching the exchange with a confident smile, spoke up. Don't worry, Akari, she said. We'll figure it out somehow, for we should keep listening. As the group stood there, frozen in uncertainty, Aetherian's grin grew wider. The dynamics of the group are already beginning to emerge, it said. This is going to be a fascinating experiment. As the creature spoke, a wall of light materialized before them, displaying a series of cards with intricate characters engraved on each one. The cards seemed to shimmer and glow, radiating an otherworldly energy. Scenarios are the paths you will take, the abilities you will wield. Aetherion explained. Each of you will choose a scenario, and it will become your key to survival. You must learn to master your scenario, to unlock its secrets and harness its power. The faster you adapt, the better your chances of survival. The group stood there, staring at the cards in a mixture of awe and trepidation, as Aetherian's laughter echoed through the air. The air was heavy with anticipation as the group stood before the cards, the words on which seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The flickering glow of the cards cast eerie shadows on the walls, as if the very darkness itself was alive and watching. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the soft hum of the cards as they emitted a gentle, blue-green light. Scenario of the Magi. Scenario of the Thief. Scenario of the Warrior. Scenario of Light. Scenario of the Lich. Scenario of Darkness. Scenario of the Sword. Scenario of the Bard. Scenario of the Alchemist. Scenario of the Summoner. And Scenario of the Cleric. The words on the cards seemed to whisper secrets to each of the individuals, drawing them in with an irresistible force. Aetherian's voice was like a rusty gate, scraping against the silence as it spoke. All of you, step forward. The group obeyed, their feet moving in unison as they approached the cards. As they did, the cards began to glow brighter, the light enveloping each of them like a shroud. The voices of the cards grew louder, more insistent, until each person could feel the words resonating deep within their chest. The choice was instinctive, driven by some primal urge that defied rational explanation. Each person reached out, their hand hovering over the card that called to them, before finally making their selection. But as they did, the cards seemed to blur out the information, keeping each person's choice a secret. Aetherian's gaze swept over the group, its eyes glinting with a malevolent light. All right, now that all of you have chosen your scenarios, I'll let you in on some other information about the Mirror Realm. The creature's voice was like a slow-moving river, dripping with menace. As it explained the intricacies of the world. Magic exists in this world, Aetherion said, and can be harnessed through the use of cardiomagia, a magical energy that stems from the heart. Each of your scenarios will have different succession systems, but each a 0 to 5 like progression, showing how much you've learned and how well you can control your abilities. For example, the scenario of the Magi, which has magic attribute, has a succession that goes like this: aspirant, conjurer, sage, enchanter, archmage. The creature's words were like a web, intricate and complex, drawing the group in with promises of power and danger. As Aetherion spoke, the group listened with rapt attention, their minds reeling with the implications. May's eyes grew wide with excitement, her face set in a determined expression. Koki's gaze was fixed intently on the creature, his eyes burning with a fierce light. Akimitsu's face was a mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed a hint of fear. The creature continued, its voice weaving a spell of darkness and foreboding. Not all scenarios have a magic attribute, it said. Some will use cardiomagia to enhance the wielder, granting them abilities that defy explanation. Aetherion's words were like a cold wind, sending shivers down the spines of the group. As the creature spoke of the beasts and wildlife that inhabited the Mirror Realm, the group's expressions grew more somber. Everything in this world exists because of cardiomagia, Aetherion said. Even the plant life is self-aware, and will wither upon contact with human skin due to the cardiomagia emitted by it. Roy's eyes flickered at this, his face pale as he remembered his initial experience with the plants. The creature's words painted a picture of a world that was both beautiful and terrifying, where the laws of reality were twisted and distorted. The group listened, entranced, as Aetherion spoke of the different danger levels of the beasts, crawlers, lesser beasts, specters, night mares, domain owners, and divine cardia. Each level brought with it an increase in intelligence, strength, and mystical abilities, making the creatures more formidable and more terrifying. He pointed out that an icon on their head would have different colors which represented their difficulty. As Aetherion finished speaking, the group felt a sense of trepidation. They knew that they were in for a journey that would test their limits, push them to the edge of sanity and beyond. Lily in a Cage. Yuri, Chapter 3, Survival in the Mirror. 3.2%. The creature's parting words were like a death sentence, hanging in the air like a challenge. The The first page of your chapter will begin in 2 minutes. Your objective is to kill 3 crawlers and 1 lesser beast in an hour. The area, the Dark Forest Calaginia, you will be teleported to as Cardia beasts from danger level crawler to lesser beast, but there's no guarantee you won't come across a beast of a higher danger level. Failure to achieve this goal before the time given will result in death. If you succeed, your reward would be food and trait upgrades. Your first page difficulty is mild. The group exchanged nervous glances, their hearts racing with anticipation. They knew that they had to work together if they wanted to survive, but they also knew that the Mirror Realm would not be kind to them. The clock was ticking, and their journey was about to begin. Chapter 4, Beyond the Shattered Mind. As they materialized in the depths of Calaginia, the group was met with an unsettling sensation, like a shroud of unease had been draped over the forest. The air was heavy with an otherworldly presence, and the sky above was a deep, foreboding void, as if the very heavens had been extinguished. But the light in the surrounding area was still present, although Dimakari's eyes widened in terror as she gazed up at the darkness, her scream piercing the stillness like a shard of glass. Ah! The others turned to her, their faces etched with concern, as they too took in the dreadful sight. But Ryo's attention was drawn to something else entirely. His wrist seemed to be emitting a faint, dark glow, like a whispered promise of power. He recalled the scenario he had chosen, the one that had called to him with an eerie resonance, the scenario of the Lich. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized that this was the manifestation of his newfound abilities. He glanced down at his wrist, and his eyes narrowed as he took in the details. The write-ups on his wrist were a detailed explanation of his current traits. Scenario of the Lich Aspirant. Dark Magic, Stage 0. Lesser Necromancy, Stage 0. Resurrection, Stage 0. Threat Perception, Stage 1. The words seemed to dance on his skin, a reminder of the powers that lay dormant within him. Ryo's expression was inscrutable, but a hint of curiosity flickered in his eyes. He covered his wrist with his sleeve, the weight of his jacket suddenly feeling oppressive. As the group continued on their journey, their footsteps quiet on the forest floor, they couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The trees loomed above them, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snatch at their clothes. They avoided touching the plants, wary of the strange energy that seemed caused them to react. The only creatures they encountered were the Scarvix, those transparent, hovering insects with their insides visible, like tiny, glowing lanterns. The book had told them that these creatures were anomalies, without a danger level or any icon to indicate their threat. But it was too quiet, the stillness oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath in anticipation of something. And then, without warning, a white wall of light erupted in front of them, a timer ticking away with alarming rapidity. 45 minutes left. The group exchanged nervous glances, their hearts racing with anticipation. They had to find a crawler-level beast, and fast. As they pressed on, the forest revealed its secrets, like a slow unfurling tapestry. They saw flowers that glowed in different colors, like the Nixoria's tear, that rare and enigmatic bloom. Its petals were a deep, iridescent blue, shaped like delicate, curved daggers, and the center of the flower pulsed with a soft, ethereal light that seemed to take on a different color depending on the person who approached it. The group's footsteps slowed, mesmerized by the beauty of the flower, but they knew they couldn't linger. And then, without warning, they heard it. A rustling in the underbrush, a snapping of twigs, a low, menacing growl. The group's head snapped up, their eyes locking onto the source of the sound. They had been prepared for this moment, crafting crude weapons from tree branches and Akamitsu's pocket knife. Whatever approached would have to face prey that would fight back, tooth and nail. "We're not going down without a fight," Akamitsu muttered, his eyes flashing with determination. "Let's do this," Tsukiko whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. Ryo's expression was inscrutable, but a hint of anticipation flickered in his eyes. He was ready for whatever lay ahead. As the creature emerged from the shadows, its presence was like a dark omen, foretelling a terror that would haunt them forever. It was a monster unlike any other, with no eyes to speak of, just a head filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its body was about the size of a lion, covered in spiky, fiery protrusions that seemed to writhe and twist like living flames. The creature's back was adorned with huge, barnacle-like attachments that emitted a noxious gas, a trap that would ensnare its victims and... Kenzo's voice was laced with urgency as he warned, "Guys, don't breathe in the gas, it will cause you to hallucinate, it's a trap." But it was too late. The gas had already taken hold, and the group was render them helpless. Enthralled, their minds ensnared in a web of illusions. However, remained unaffected, his eyes fixed on the creature with a calculating intensity. He had anticipated this, and his preparedness was a testament to his resourcefulness. May, too, had grasped the stakes, her Ryo level-headed demeanor a beacon of calm in the midst of chaos. As she gazed upon the beast, her eyes narrowed in on the icon etched into its forehead, a deep, rich purple that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Her mind racing, she recognized the significance of the color, her knowledge of the beast in the book Aetherion handed flooding back to her. The purple icon was a harbinger of a spectre-level threat, a classification reserved for entities that wielded formidable powers capable of manipulating the very fabric of human minds. Although this particular beast was considered one of the weaker specters, its abilities were still not to be underestimated. The power to mess with human minds was a terrifying prospect, one that could reduce even the strongest wills to rubble. The Cardia beast was a dark prum, the icon's purple hue seemed to mock her, a reminder of how formidable the foe they were facing was, and the devastating consequences that awaited them if they failed to overcome it. As the creature's influence took hold, the group's behavior became increasingly erratic. Akimitsu's screams pierced the air, his eyes wide with terror as he was forced to confront some unspeakable horror. The others, too, were trapped in their own personal nightmares, their cries and wails a haunting melody that seemed to delight the creature. Ryo knew he had to act, but his options were limited. He hid behind a tree, gripping the stake in his hand with a determination that belied his fear. The creature's gaze seemed to bore into his very soul, but he refused to back down. Akimitsu, Koki, Tsukiko, Hitomi, and Akari were all at its mercy, their minds shattered by the gas's insidious effects. Kenzo, however, was a different story. Despite his terror, he summoned to the gas's range, his actions driven by a desperation that was palpable. Courage that was admirable, if not foolhardy. He dragged Akimitsu out of why Akimitsu. Perhaps it was because of how much his character drew him in, or maybe it was just an instinctive response to the terror that surrounded them. As the creature vanished into thin air, the group slowly returned to their senses, their eyes haunted by the memories of what they had seen. Tsukiko reached out for Akimitsu, and they embraced, their tears a testament to the trauma they had endured. The others watched in silence, their faces etched with a mix of horror and relief. But the respite was short-lived. The creature reappeared, its attack swift and merciless. Akimitsu threw himself in front of Tsukiko, his body shielding her from the creature's talons. In a moment of inspired bravery, he grabbed the creature and stabbed it with the stake and his pocket knife. The others watched in awe, their terror momentarily forgotten in the face of Akimitsu's heroism. As the creature's grip loosened, Akimitsu's voice was barely above a whisper. "Run, all of you, now. This is your chance, it's too strong for us to handle, this is the only way you'll be able to survive." The group was paralyzed, unable to abandon him to his fate. But Ryo was different. He turned to leave, his eyes cold and unyielding. And then, the creature's mouth opened, revealing 3 glowing lights that seemed to hypnotize the group. They fell into a trance, their minds invaded by Akimitsu's memories. The creature's power was a dark and malevolent force, one that threatened to consume them all. As they stood there, entranced, the creature's grip on their minds tightened, pulling them deeper into a world of terror and despair. Akimitsu and Tsukiko had been working at the same corporate company in Tokyo for several years. They were a power couple, with Akimitsu rising through the ranks of the marketing department and Tsukiko excelling as a talented graphic designer. But despite their professional success, their personal lives were beginning to unravel. It started with small things. Their boss, Mr. Nakamura, would make suggestive comments to Tsukiko, trying to get her to laugh or smile. At first, she tried to brush it off, thinking that it was just a harmless joke. But as time went on, the comments became more frequent and more explicit. Mr. Nakamura would touch her arm or shoulder, making her feel uncomfortable and trapped. Akimitsu noticed the change in Tsukiko's behavior. She would come home from work feeling anxious and stressed, her eyes sunken and her skin pale. He would try to talk to her about it, but she would just shake it off, saying that she could handle it. But Akimitsu knew that she couldn't handle it. He could see the toll that the harassment was taking on her, the way it was eating away at her confidence and her sense of self-worth. He felt powerless to stop it, like he was watching his girlfriend being slowly destroyed by a monster. One night, Akimitsu witnessed Mr. Nakamura making a particularly lewd comment to Tsukiko. He was standing in the doorway of her office, his eyes roaming over her body like a predator. Akimitsu felt a surge of anger and frustration, but he didn't know what to do. He didn't want to make a scene, but he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Excuse me, Mr. Nakamura," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think you've said enough. Mr. Nakamura turned to him, a sneer on his face. "Oh, Akimitsu," he said. "You're so sensitive. Can't handle a little joke, can you?" Akimitsu felt his anger boil over, but he tried to keep his cool. "It's not a joke, Mr. Nakamura," he said. "It's harassment. And it needs to stop." Mr. Nakamura laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You think you can tell me what to do, Akimitsu," he said. "I'm your boss. And I'll do what I want, when I want." Akimitsu felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that he had just made an enemy, and that his career was on the line. But he didn't care. He was willing to risk everything to protect Tsukiko, to make sure that she was safe and happy. One day, Tsukiko came home from work in tears. Mr. Nakamura had called her into his office and made her sit through a meeting where he berated her for her work, telling her that she was incompetent and that she would never amount to anything. Akimitsu was furious, but Tsukiko just shook her head, saying that she couldn't take it anymore. As the days went by, Tsukiko's suffering worsened. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing and her sheets drenched in sweat. She would have nightmares about Mr. Nakamura, about the way he would touch her and the way he would talk to her. Akimitsu would try to comfort her, but she would just push him away, saying that she was fine. Akimitsu felt like he was losing her, like she was slipping away from him and he couldn't catch her. He would try to talk to her about it, but she would just shut down, saying that she didn't want to talk about it. He felt powerless, like he was watching his girlfriend being consumed by her own despair. The final straw came when Mr. Nakamura called Tsukiko into his office again, this time to tell her that she was being demoted. He said that she wasn't performing well enough, that she was a disappointment to the company. Tsukiko came home from work that day, her eyes empty and her face pale. She just sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, like she had given up on life. Akimitsu was devastated. He felt like he had failed her, like he had let her down. He didn't know what to do, how to make it better. He just sat next to her, holding her hand, feeling like he was losing her forever. As the night wore on, they found themselves standing on the Tokyo waterfront, the neon lights of the city reflected in the dark waters. They were holding hands, but it felt like they were a million miles apart. "I'm sorry, Tsukiko," Akimitsu said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." Tsukiko looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "It's not your fault, Akimitsu," she said. "We were both trapped in that nightmare. But I think we've been holding on for too long. I think it's time to let go." Akimitsu felt a surge of despair, like he was losing everything that mattered to him. But he knew that Tsukiko was right. They had been holding on for too long, and it was time to let go. And then, without saying a word, they made their decision. They would attempt to take their own lives together, under the cover of night. It was a tragic and desperate decision, one that would have far-reaching consequences for those who knew them. But just as they were about to take the final step, something strange happened. A faint glow appeared on the horizon, like the first light of dawn. It was the mirror, its presence both captivating and unsettling. Without a word, they felt an inexplicable pull towards it, as if it held the answers to all their questions. Together, they took a step forward, into the unknown. The mirror's power enveloped them, and everything went black. The words hung in the air, a haunting echo that seemed to reverberate deep within their souls. "What was that?" Ryo asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he feared the answer. That was Akimitsu's memories. Wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm them. Tears streamed down their cheeks, a testament to the depth of their connection to Akimitsu and the horror they had just witnessed. The memories they had shared, though not their own, had left an indelible mark on their hearts. Ryo, who had been prepared to abandon Akimitsu just moments before, felt a pang of guilt and shame. His body, as if betraying his initial. As they slowly emerged from the trance-like state, they were met with intentions, refused to move, as if rooted to the spot. The others, too, steeled themselves, ready to face the beast head-on, their resolve strengthened by the bond they shared with Akimitsu. Lily in a Cage, Ori no Naka no Yuri, Chapter 4, Beyond the Shattered. 4.34%. Coursed through his veins. He knew he couldn't abandon Akimitsu, not now, not after sharing in his memories and experiencing the depth of his pain. Akimitsu, however, seemed to be running out of the adrenaline that had fueled his bravery just moments before. His strength was beginning to fade, his grip on the monster weakening, as the reality of his situation began to sink in. The beast, sensing its chance, tightened its grip, its talons digging deeper into Akimitsu's flesh, threatening to snuff out the life that still flickered within him. Chapter 5, Shattered Minds, Fractured Souls. The silence was oppressive, a heavy blanket that suffocated the group as they stood frozen in horror. The memories of Akimitsu and Tsukiko, forced upon them by the creature, lingered in their minds like a malignant shadow. The beast, still embedded in Akimitsu's body, seemed to sense their paralysis, its talons digging deeper into his flesh with an unspeakable cruelty. As they watched, transfixed, the ease wounds began to close, its regenerative powers a grotesque mockery of life. The stakes in their hands seemed pitifully inadequate, and the group's initial determination began to waver. Why bother? The creature was in not be defeated so easily. Spectre of death that would, but as they looked at each other, they saw something in each other's eyes, a glimmer of understanding, a spark of empathy. They were strangers, thrown together by circumstance, yet they felt a connection that went beyond words. Each of them had their own hopelessness. And in their backs on Akimitsu. Demons, their own struggles with loneliness they knew they couldn't turn. Ryo, who had long ago given up on connecting with others, felt a strange sense of responsibility wash over him. He couldn't explain why he wanted to help Akimitsu, why this memory had awakened something within him. All he knew was that he couldn't abandon them, and now. The silence stretched out, thread of tension that threatened to snap at any moment. And then, suddenly, Ryo spoke up, his voice a low groan of frustration. "Gah, this is getting annoying, this thing has gone way too far." The words broke the spell, and the group's inertia shattered. Kenzo looked at Ryo, a sad yet inspired smile spreading across his face. "The monster is a specter," he said, his voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "Any chance defeating this one would meet the requirements to complete the page." The air around them seemed to vibrate with tension as Kenzo asked the question. The monster, still penetrating Akimitsu, seemed to sense their renewed determination, its presence growing more menacing, more oppressive. And in that moment, the group knew they had to act. With a sense of desperation, they rushed forward, their stakes at the ready. But not Meishi had another idea in mind, her eyes scanning the pages of the book Aetherion had given them. She was searching for something, a hidden key to unlock their salvation. A way to overcome the monster and save Akimitsu. And as she searched, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope. As they closed in on the monster, Kenzo felt a sudden surge of energy emanating from his left wrist, where a soft green glow had begun to pulse. He had chosen the scenario of an alchemist, and now, as he gazed at his wrist, he s traits that had been bestowed upon him, scenario of the alchemist aspirant. The words danced before his eyes, a tantalizing promise of power. Elixir creation, stage 0. Material manipulation, stage 1. Craft, stage 1. Self-heal, stage 0. Catalytic insight, stage 1. Kenzo's eyes widened as he took in the sheer scope of his newfound abilities. He felt a thrill of excitement mixed with trepidation. These powers might just give them a fighting chance against the beast, but he had no idea how to harness them. The traits, but he stretched out his hands, attempting to summon. It was like trying to grasp a handful of sand. The power slipped through his fingers, refusing to be contained. Time was running out, and the others were pressing forward, their stakes at the ready. And then, like a spark of inspiration, Kenzo remembered Aetherion's words. The heart was the source of cardia magia, and the stronger the emotion, the stronger the radiance. He focused on the trait of material manipulation, his hands closing around a pile of dirt as he willed it to transform into metal. The air seemed to vibrate with tension as he poured all his heart and soul into the task. And then, in a burst of wonder, it worked. The dirt shimmered and shifted, its molecular structure rearranging itself before his very eyes. Kenzo felt a sense of awe and trepidation. He had defied the very foundation of nature. Emboldened, Kenzo craft swords, imbuing them with the ability to deal greater damage. The blades seemed to sing with energy. Their metal surfaces etched with intricate patterns that glowed with a soft, ethereal light. Meanwhile, the others were engaging the monster, their stakes flashing engaging in the dim light. Tsukiko a whirlwind of rage and sorrow, her blade stabbing relentlessly as she screamed, "Let him go." Akari, too, had joined the fray, stake piercing the monster's hide with a soft whoosh. Hitomi's slender form seemed to contradict the ferocity with which she struck, her stake piercing the beast's hide with a force that belied her elegant and refined demeanor. The motion almost unnatural, as if her body had been possessed by a primal intensity that reveled in the chaos of battle. Her usual poise and Beauty were replaced by a feral determination, her eyes blazing with a fierce inner light as she drove the stake deeper into the monster's flesh. The contrast between her delicate features and the brutal efficiency of her attack was jarring, as if the very essence of her being had been transformed by the urgency of the moment. Meanwhile, summoning every last ounce of strength to thrust his stake forward, using the wooden shaft to push back against the monster's relentless advance on Akimitsu. His muscles strained with effort, the tendons in his arms and shoulders bulging as he leaned into the task, determined to hold the creature at bay. The stake creaked and groaned under the pressure, but Koki refused to yield, his eyes fixed intently on the monster as he poured all his energy into keeping it from delivering the final blow. Akari felt a sudden surge of energy emanating from her left wrist, a white, holy glow that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly power. She looked down, her eyes widening as she saw the traits of her own scenario. Scenario of the Cleric. Exorcism, Stage 1. Healing, Stage 2. Purification, Stage 0. Divine Magic, Stage 1. Support, Stage 0. Akari's eyes seemed to light up with understanding as she gazed at the words, her heart overflowing with emotion. She looked at Akimitsu, his life force ebbing away as the monster prepared to deliver the final blow. Tsukiko was still stabbing away, her rage and sorrow fueling her attack, and Koki still doing his best to resist, but the monster was ignoring them both, its attention fixed on Akimitsu. Akari's heart was overwhelmed with emotion, and she began to glow with a soft, holy light. Suddenly, Akimitsu's wounds began to heal, the damage repairing itself little by little. It was a small miracle, but it was enough to give him a chance to hold on to life. Up until this moment, Akimitsu had been enduring the pain of his situation, his mind clouded with confusion. Why wouldn't they run? He thought to himself. It would be worse if they all died here. But as he looked at the others, he saw a fierce determination in their eyes, a refusal to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. And then, in a burst of desperation, Kenzo stood forth, his arms outstretched and overloaded with the swords he had crafted. The blades seemed to shimmer and glow, each one unique and finely crafted, as if eager to be wielded by those who would take them. Kenzo's eyes met Akari's, and then Tsukiko's, and then Hitomi's and Koki's, before turning towards Mel, who stood in the distance, her eyes scanning the pages of the book. Without hesitation, Kenzo tossed a sword in her direction, the blade spinning through the air before coming to rest at her feet. Ryo, who had been struggling to grasp the intricacies of his traits, turned to observe the others, his eyes drawn to the chaos unfolding before him. As he approached the beast, a spark of curiosity ignited within him, and he wondered if his newfound abilities might hold the key to turning the tide of battle. His gaze swept across the scene, taking in the desperate struggle, and for a moment, his usual stoic expression faltered, replaced by a look of stunned amazement. It was a rare crack in his emotional armor, and it seemed to stir something deep within him. With a sense of newfound purpose, Ryo joined the fray, his voice calling out to Kenzo in a moment of uncharacteristic familiarity. "Give me one of those." Kenzo. The words felt strange on his lips, a departure from his usual reserve, but the urgency of the situation seemed to have broken down his defenses. He took a sword from Kenzo and charged forward, his movements fluid and determined. Meanwhile, Mei, who had been watching from a distance, her eyes scanning the pages of the book, suddenly realized the gravity of their situation. She had stumbled upon a crucial piece of information, a warning about the monster that they needed to heed. But it was too late. The monster, sensing its own mortality, released Akimitsu and sprang back, its gaze fixing on Koki. As the creature's attention locked onto Koki, its face seemed to shift and contort, the cracked line that served as a substitute for its eyes snapping open like a void. The darkness that poured out was like nothing they had ever seen before. An endless, abyssal expanse that seemed to draw them in with an otherworldly pull. The group, transfixed by the horror before them, fell into a collective trance, their minds reeling as they stared into the very depths of madness. Koki Matsumoto's childhood was a blur of new faces, new places, and new experiences. His parents were always on the move, never staying in one place for too long. They were drifters, chasing the next big thing, the next adventure. But behind the excitement and freedom, Koki's parents were hiding a dark secret. They were drowning in debt. Yui, Koki's mother, had a gambling addiction. She had started playing pachinko to cope with the stress of raising a child, but soon found herself hooked. Taro, Koki's father, tried to support her, but his own business kept failing, leaving them deeper and deeper in debt. They moved from town to town, trying to escape their creditors, but the debt followed them everywhere. As a result, Koki grew up feeling like an outsider. He was always the new Kid in school, always the one who didn't quite fit IR, he was a loner, content to spend his days exploring the woods, reading books, or simply observing the world around him. But despite his tough exterior, Koki had a deep of vulnerability with. He longed for of belonging, for a place to call home. He longed for connection to share his thoughts and feelings. One day, when was 10 years old, his parents disappeared. They left him a note, saying they had to go on a journey, and that they would be, but they never came back. Koki was left alone, with he spent months living on the streets, scrounging for food and shelter. He had to steal to survive, snatching bread from convenience stores and rummaging through trash cans for scraps. He was always looking over his shoulder, afraid of being caught by the police or worse. But even in the midst of all that hardship, Koki persisted with a warm, awkward smile and hoped that things would somehow turn around for the better. It was during this time that Koki was taken in by a stranger. The man, who introduced himself as Ryujin, was charismatic and confident, with a charming smile and a quick wit. He promised Koki a better life, a life of comfort and security, and Koki, desperate for a way out of his situation, accepted. But Ryujin's true nature revealed. Behind closed doors, he was a monster, prone to violent outbursts and cruel punishments. Koki was forced to endure physical and emotional torture, all while being told that he was lucky to have been taken in by Ryujin. As Koki grew older, he began to attend Haruki Senior High, the same school that Ryo, Hitomi, attended. But made any connections with them, or with anyone else. He was an outsider, always observing from a distance, never quite fitting in. Even if he had seen them, somewhere in school, he didn't know them, where they weren't acquainted. He was just another face in the crowd, another invisible soul, and then, one night, he stumbled upon the mysterious antique shop that only seemed to appear after dark. The sign above the door read Curios and Antiques, but the windows were always boarded up, and the door was always locked. Except, that is, on nights when the moon was full. Koki had heard whispers about the shop from other street kids. Of a mysterious mirror that only appeared at night. They said it was a portal to another world or something along those lines. Koki didn't believe it, of course. Lu was a skeptic, though he'd looked at the world in rose-tinted glasses most of the time. This went far beyond the scope of what counted as realism. But as he stood outside the shop, feeling the weight of his loneliness and his longing for connection, he couldn't help but feel drawn to the mirror. As he pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, Koki was enveloped in a warm, dim, ominous light. The air was thick with the scent of incense and old books, and the sound of soft music seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. And then, he essayed the mirror. Carvings of strange symbols and antique thing, with etched into the frame. It seemed to pulsate with a dark, otherworldly energy, emitting a faint hum that drew Koki in like a moth to a flame. As the group emerged from the trance-like state, they were met with a sense of disorientation and confusion. What had just transpired, they wondered, their hearts heavy with a pain that wasn't entirely their own. It was as if they had been transported to a different realm, one that was both familiar and yet utterly foreign. They had borne witness to another memory, one that was partially theirs, yet belonged to someone else. This time, it was Koki's past that had been laid bare before them. Hitomi's voice was laced with anguish as she spoke, her wide with a lily in a cage. Naka N. Chapter 5, Shattered Minds. She asked, her words barely above a whisper. The others nodded in silent agreement, their faces etched with a deep sense of empathy and understanding. The air was filled with the echoes of screams, the sound of anguish and torment that seemed to linger long after the memory had faded. As they struggled to come to terms with what they had just witnessed, the monster's gaze snapped towards Hitomi, its attention fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. The group's hearts sank, their senses on high alert as they realized that they were far from safe. The creature's interest in Hitomi seemed to be more than just a passing fancy, and they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being pulled into a dark and sinister game, one that would test their resolve and push them to the very limits of their endurance. Chapter 6, Shattered Minds, Fractured Souls 2. Hitomi Higashi was a student at Haruki Senior High, known for her stunning beauty and captivating charm. She was the center of attention, and she reveled in the admiration of her classmates. But beneath the surface of her perfect facade, Hitomi was struggling. She had a deep-seated need for validation, and she found it in the praise of others. She would often sleep with boys in her school, not because she was interested in them, but because she craved the attention and admiration they gave her. They would tell her how beautiful she was, how lucky they were to be with her, and Hitomi would lap up the praise like a starving dog. But as time went on, the boys' words began to change. They would whisper to each other, calling her a slut, a whore, and worse. They would shame her, saying that she was easy, that she was only good for one thing. And the girls around her would join in, excluding her from social events, and spreading rumors about her. Hitomi tried to brush it off, to tell herself that she didn't care what others thought. But the words cut deep, and she began to feel like she was worthless. She felt like she was living in a constant state of shame, like she was always walking around with a scarlet letter on her forehead. As the shame and ridicule continued, Hitomi's mentality began to suffer. She felt empty and hollow, like she was just going through the motions of life without any real purpose. She began to question her own value, wondering if she was more than just a beautiful shell. She started to doubt her own worth, feeling like she was nothing more than an object to be used and discarded. The depression crept in, slowly at first, but it soon consumed her. Hitomi felt like she was drowning in a sea of despair, like she was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. She would cry herself to sleep at night, feeling like she was completely alone, like no one understood her. One night, as she walked home from school, Hitomi saw it. The mirror. It was standing in a dark alleyway, its surface reflecting the faint moonlight above. The mirror seemed to appear out of nowhere, and Hitomi felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached it. She had never seen anything like it before. It was as if the mirror was alive, pulsing with a dark, otherworldly energy. As she gazed into the mirror's depths, Hitomi saw a reflection of admiration, of attention, of worship. It showed her a world where she was the center of attention, where everyone adored her and wanted to be her. The mirror's power was seductive, and Hitomi was helpless to resist. She felt like she was being pulled into a world of pure bliss, a world where she the queen and everyone else was just a subject. For the first time in months, Hitomi felt a sense of hope. She felt like she had finally found a way to escape the shame and the ridicule, to find a sense of purpose and belonging. And as she disappeared into the mirror's depths, Hitomi knew that she would never be the same again. She had found a new sense of self, a new sense of worth, and she was determined to make the most of it. Once again, they had trespassed into the intimate recesses of another person's mind, this time Hitomi's. The Cardia beast's gaze was fixed on them, its drooling a grotesque testament to the twisted pleasure it derived from their suffering. As they relived Hitomi's memories, the group's screams echoed through the air, their agony a symphony of pain that seemed to reverberate deep within their very souls. Akari's sobbing grew louder, her pleas for mercy heart-wrenching. "Please make it stop," she begged, her voice cracking under the weight of her own despair. The others were similarly affected, their hearts aching with a pain that seemed to know no bounds. The emotions they experienced were not just their own, but also those of the individual in the memory, a cumulative effect that multiplied their distress indefinitely. It was as if they were trapped in a never-ending cycle of suffering, each person's pain feeding into the others, creating a chain reaction of anguish that threatened to consume them all. The Cardia beast's presence seemed to amplify this effect, its dark energy drawing out the deepest, most primal fears and emotions from their very being. The group's minds were a maelstrom of torment, their sanity hanging by a thread as they struggled to cope with the overwhelming onslaught of emotions that threatened to tear them asunder. And then, as if sensing Akari's vulnerability, the Cardia beast's gaze shifted, its attention fixing on her with an unspeakable hunger. Its eyes, like two voids of darkness, seemed to bore into her very soul, and Akari's sobs faltered as she felt the weight of the beast's malevolent intent. The group's collective terror spiked, their hearts racing in unison as they realized that Akari was now the beast's next target, and that she would soon be forced to endure the same brutal invasion of her memories that they had all just suffered. Akari Hana was a delicate soul, a shy and timid girl who bloomed like a flower in the quiet moments of life. She had a loving family and a comfortable home, but her world was shattered by the cruel whispers and taunts of her female classmates. As she entered her teenage years, Akari became the object of unwanted attention from the boys at school. They would stare at her, make lewd comments, and brush against her in the hallways. But it wasn't the boys' attention that hurt Akari the most, it was the jealousy and resentment of the girls. The girls at school, fueled by their own insecurities and rivalries, began to bully Akari mercilessly. They would mock her clothes, her hair, and her interests, and spread rumors about her supposed easy nature. They would push her around, trip her in the hallways, and exclude her from social events. The bullying escalated, and Akari found herself walking home from school in a daze, her mind numb and her heart heavy. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of despair, with no lifeline to cling to. One day, the bullying took a darker turn. Akari was ambushed on her way home from school, and something happened. Something that left her shattered and broken, her mind reeling with the horror of it all. As she stumbled through the streets, Akari felt like she was living in a nightmare. She couldn't escape the memories of what had happened, couldn't shake the feeling of being dirty and tainted. She felt like she was losing herself, like she was disappearing into a void of darkness and despair. And then, she saw it. The mirror. It was standing in a quiet alleyway, its surface reflecting the fading light of day like a still pond. Akari felt drawn to it, like a moth to a flame, and she stumbled towards it with a sense of inevitability. As she gazed into the mirror's depths, Akari saw a reflection that was not her own. It was a vision of herself, but shattered and broken, like a flower that had been crushed by the weight of the world. The mirror seemed to be calling to her, drawing her in with its dark, otherworldly energy. Akari's mind was foggy and disconnected, but she felt a sense of recognition, like she was seeing a part of herself that she had been trying to hide. She felt a sense of liberation, like she was finally free to let go of the pain and the shame. But it was a distant, detached feeling, like she was observing herself from outside her body. As she stood there, transfixed by the mirror's dark beauty, Akari felt her consciousness begin to fade. The world around her grew dim and distant, and she felt herself being pulled into the mirror's depths. She tried to resist, but it was too late. The mirror's power was too strong, and Akari felt herself being sucked into a vortex of darkness and despair. And as she disappeared into the mirror's abyss, Akari knew that she was finally free. Free from the pain and the shame, free from the memories that had haunted her for so long. The cycle of agony repeated itself, as if the Cardia beast was determined to exhaust every last shred of their sanity. The group's minds were ravaged by the relentless onslaught of emotions, their thoughts reduced to a jumbled mess of pain and despair. The ability to form words, to express their suffering, was lost to them once more, leaving only anguished screams and silent, tortured pleas. Their vocal cords were frozen, unable to produce even the faintest whisper, as if the beast's dark energy had somehow severed the connection between their brains and their voices. The only sound was the ragged, tortured breathing that escaped their lips, a haunting reminder of the unbearable pain that threatened to consume them whole. And yet, even this was not enough to satiate the beast's twisted hunger. I turned its attention to May, who was writhing in agony, her body contorted in a desperate attempt to escape the emotional torment that ravaged her mind. The beast's gaze fixed on her, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity, as if it could see into the very depths of her soul. May's eyes, once bright and inquisitive, were now dull and lifeless, her pupils constricted to tiny pinpricks as she struggled to cope with the overwhelming pain. Her skin was slick with sweat, her face twisted into a grimace of anguish, as if she was being flayed alive by the beast's emotional claws. The group's collective suffering seemed to amplify May's own pain, creating a feedback loop of agony that threatened to destroy them all. As the beast's attention focused on May, the group's minds were flooded with visions of her past, memories that were both familiar and yet utterly foreign. They saw glimpses of her previous life, of laughter and tears, of joy and sorrow, all of which were now twisted and distorted by the beast's dark energy. The pain was a living, breathing thing, a creature that fed on their suffering, growing stronger with each passing moment. And May, poor May, was its next victim, forced to endure the unbearable weight of her own memories, now transformed into an instrument of torture by the Cardia beast's twisted power. May Arakawa's life was a delicate balancing act, a fragile facade of perfection that hid a world of pain and despair. Behind the mask of the model student, the star of Haruki Senior High's drama club, and the darling of her teachers, May was a girl who had been broken by the cruel whims of fate. Affection had pushed May to be the best from a young age. Her parents, high society types who had always valued appearances over. They had hired tutors and coaches to help her excel in every aspect of her life, but their constant criticism and pressure had taken a devastating toll on May's mental health. She had grown up feeling like she was never good enough, like she was Just a puppet on strings with her parents pulling the marionette. As the years went by, May's anxiety and depression had spiraled out of control. She had become a shell of her former self, a hollow vessel that was filled with a desperate longing for love and acceptance. But no matter how hard she tried, she could never seem to measure up to her parents' expectations. She was always one step behind, always falling short of the perfection that they demanded. One night, as May walked home from school, she felt like she had reached her breaking point. The streets seemed to stretch out before her like a desolate wasteland, and the lights of the city seemed to mock her with their brightness. She felt like she was alone in the world, like no one understood her or cared about her struggles. And then, she saw it. The mirror. It was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, its surface reflecting the neon lights of the city like a dark, still pool. May felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached it, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She was drawn to the mirror like a moth to a flame, helpless to resist its pull. As she gazed into the mirror's depths, May saw a reflection that was not her own. It was a vision of herself, but twisted and corrupted, with eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. The mirror seemed to be calling to her, drawing her in with its dark, otherworldly energy. May's mind was foggy and disconnected, but she felt a sense of recognition, like she was seeing a part of herself that she had been trying to hide. She felt a sense of liberation, like she was finally free to be herself. But it was a distant, detached feeling, like she was observing herself from outside her body. As she stood there, transfixed by the mirror's dark beauty, May felt her consciousness begin to fade. The world around her grew dim and distant. And she felt herself being pulled into the mirror's depths. She tried to resist, but it was too late. The mirror's power was too strong, and May felt herself being sucked into a vortex of darkness and despair. And as she disappeared into the mirror's abyss, May knew that she was finally free. Free from the expectations of her parents, free from the pressure to be perfect, and free from the pain and despair that had haunted her for so long. But it was a freedom that came at a terrible cost, a cost that May would only realize when it was too late. The Cardia beast's gaze finally settled on Kenzo, its last victim, as it prepared to deliver the final blow. The group's minds, already fragile and fractured, were on the brink of complete collapse. The cumulative effect of reliving each other's memories, of experiencing the darkest corners of their own psyches, had left them shattered and broken. Kenzo, once the resourceful and determined boy who had crafted swords to aid them in battle, was now reduced to a mere shell of his former self. His eyes, once bright and full of hope, were now dull and vacant, his mind a jumbled mess of pain and despair. He muttered incoherently, his words lost in a sea of madness, as he stumbled and fell to the ground. The others were no better, their minds similarly shattered by the beast's relentless assault. They lay scattered around Kenzo, their bodies broken and twisted, their minds lost in a world of agony and terror. The Cardia beast's power had reduced them to mere husks, empty vessels devoid of hope or sanity. As the beast prepared to deliver the final blow, the air was heavy with anticipation. The group's minds, already on the brink of collapse, were poised to shatter completely, leaving them forever lost in a world of madness and despair. The Cardia beast's twisted power had brought them to the edge of the abyss, and now, with one final push, it would send them tumbling into the depths of insanity. The beast's gaze seemed to bore into Kenzo's very soul, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. Kenzo's mind, already fragile and fractured, was on the verge of complete collapse. One more memory, one more wave of pain, and it would be over. The Cardia beast's power would consume him completely, leaving him a mindless, shattered husk, forever lost in a world of agony and terror. Kenzo Mori was born into a world of privilege and expectation. As the son of a wealthy and influential family in Tokyo's high society, he was groomed from a young age to take over the family business and carry on the Mori legacy. But beneath the surface of his confident elegance, Kenzo was suffocating under the weight of his family's expectations. His father, a ruthless and cunning businessman, demanded nothing but perfection from his son. Kenzo was expected to excel in every aspect of his life, from his studies to his social connections to his physical appearance. As a result, Kenzo grew up feeling like he was living in a constant state of performance. He was always on, always playing the role of the perfect son and heir. But deep down, he was desperate to break free from the constraints of his life and forge his own path. Despite his polished exterior, Kenzo was secretly rebelling against the legacy that had been thrust upon him. He longed to pursue his own passions and interests, to make his own mistakes and learn from them. But every time he tried to assert his independence, his father's disapproval was swift and merciless. One day, Kenzo reached his breaking point. He had been forced to attend a high society party, to mingle with the cream of Tokyo's elite and make connections that would further his family's interests. But as he stood there, smiling and laughing and pretending to be someone he wasn't, Kenzo felt like he was losing himself. He excused himself from the party and stepped out into the night air, feeling the cool breeze on his face and the weight of his family's expectations bearing down on him. And that's when he saw it, the mirror, standing in the shadows like a dark and mysterious presence. As Kenzo approached the mirror, he felt a sense of trepidation. But he also felt a sense of curiosity, a sense that this might be the key to unlocking the secrets of his own identity. He gazed into the mirror's depths, and what he saw there changed him forever. The mirror showed him a reflection of himself, but not the self he presented to the world. It showed him a self that was flawed and vulnerable, a self that was struggling to break free from the constraints of his life. And in that moment, Kenzo knew that he had a choice to make. He could continue to live the life that his family had laid out for him, or he could take a chance and forge his own path. As Kenzo stood there, frozen in indecision, the mirror seemed to be calling to him. It was offering him a way out, a way to escape the weight of his family's legacy and find his true self. The Dark Prum's twisted goal had finally been achieved. The group's minds were shattered, their hearts aching with a pain that seemed to worsen with each passing moment. The monster's relentless assault on their psyches had left them broken and vulnerable, their cardia magia now a rich and potent elixir that would satisfy the beast's dark hunger. As the creature prepared to feast on its prey, it noticed something peculiar. Akari's hands, despite being limp and lifeless, were glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The beast's curiosity was piqued, its twisted mind wondering if this was a sign that its prey was not yet fully ripe for consumption. The creature's gaze fixed on Akari's glowing hands, its eyes narrowing as it attempted to understand the significance of this phenomenon. Was it a residual effect of the group's cardia magia, a final spark of resistance that refused to be extinguished? Or was it something more, a hidden reserve of power that could potentially threaten the beast's dominance? The cardia beast's hesitation was a fleeting moment of uncertainty, a brief pause in its otherwise relentless pursuit of destruction. But it was enough to give the group a glimmer of hope, a chance to rally their shattered minds and summon a final, desperate bid for survival. As the creature continued to regard Akari's glowing hands, its twisted mind began to wonder if it had underestimated its prey. Were they more resilient than it had initially thought? Did they possess a hidden strength that could be used against it? The beast's doubts were a faint wiener in the darkness, but that were enough to make it 2. Lily in a Cage, Ori no Naka no Yuri, Chapter 6, Shattered Minds, Fra. 6.52%. Seemed. Chapter 7, Beyond the Brink. Ryo, once a pillar of stoic resolve, now found himself shattered by the maelstrom of foreign emotions that had ravaged his mind. The sheer intensity of the feelings that had been unleashed upon him was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. His usual emotional numbness, a shield that had protected him from the whims of his own heart, had been breached, leaving him vulnerable to the torrent of sensations that now threatened to consume him. As he struggled to maintain a semblance of coherence, Ryo felt as though he was being slowly submerged into a dark, abyssal pool of water. The pressure was crushing, the weight of the emotions bearing down upon him like a physical force that threatened to snuff out the flickering flame of his consciousness. His thoughts, once sharp and focused, were growing increasingly disjointed, his mind numb and unresponsive. The world around him had become a distant, fading memory, a recollection of a life that was rapidly slipping away from him. Ryo's sense of self, his very identity, was disintegrating, fragmenting into 1,000 disparate pieces that seemed to be drifting away from him like leaves on a winter's breeze. He was losing himself, his essence, his soul, and he was powerless to stop it. The specter, that enigmatic and malevolent presence, continued to watch them with an unblinking gaze, its intentions unclear. The cardia beast, despite its monstrous nature, seemed to possess a level of instinctive intelligence that was unsettling. It was as though the creature had developed a form of cognitive awareness, one that allowed it to adapt and evolve in response to its surroundings. This, Ryo realized, must be what Aetherion had meant when he spoke of the monster's intelligence increasing in tandem with their strength. The beast's powers, it seemed, were not limited to mere brute force, but also encompassed a level of cerebral sophistication that made it a far more formidable foe. As Ryo's thoughts grew increasingly disjointed, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the end for him, if he would soon succumb to the crushing weight of his own emotions and lose himself forever in the darkness. The prospect was a terrifying one, and yet, he felt powerless to resist it, unable to stem the tide of feelings that threatened to engulf him whole. The last remnants of his consciousness were fading, slipping away into the void, and Ryo knew that he was on the cusp of disappearing forever, lost in a sea of emotions that would consume him utterly. As the fog of unconsciousness slowly lifted, Ryo's awareness returned, like a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of a long-dormant tree. A foreign, cold sensation on his arm, a tingling feeling that seemed to seep into his very marrow, was the first thing he felt, even in his trance-like state. It was as if his body was awakening, slowly, incrementally, like a sleeper rousing from a deep slumber. His left wrist, once a mere appendage, now felt alive, thrumming with a strange, pulsating energy. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, now regained their glint of life and vigor, like embers that had been smoldering beneath the surface, waiting to be fanned into a flame. As he looked around, he was met with a scene that was both haunting and heartbreaking. The others, his fellow survivors of the Cardia beast's brutal assault, lay broken and shattered, their minds ravaged by the emotional onslaught. The monster, still watching them with an unblinking gaze, seemed oblivious to Ryo's newfound awareness, its attention fixed on the group with a malevolent intensity that was both captivating and terrifying. The air was heavy with the weight of their collective suffering, a palpable, almost tangible thing that seemed to press down upon Ryo like a physical force. He turned his attention to his dark, glowing wrist, and what he saw surprised him. The traits he had possessed since before, once mere zeros, now seemed to be stirring, like a sleeping giant awakening from a deep slumber. The numbers, once stagnant, now ticked upward, a testament to the fact that he had grown, that he had evolved, and that he had been forever changed by the experiences he had endured. Scenario of the Lich Aspirant. Dark Magic, Stage 6. Lesser Necromancy, Stage 3, Resurrection, Stage 3. Threat Perception, Stage 4. The numbers went up, and Ryo felt a sense of wonder, of awe, at the secrets that were being revealed to him. He realized, in a flash of insight, that maybe the key to unlocking greater power was the emotions that stemmed from the heart, his heart, which had received an inconceivable amount of influx, like a chain cycle, alongside the others. Could that have been the cause of his growth? But he thought to himself, is that it? If that was the key to getting stronger, why had the numbers not grown in a significant way? Perhaps it wasn't merely emitting strong emotions that would lead to a person gaining greater strength. And how high would the numbers go? So many questions swirled in his head, like a maelstrom, but this was neither the time nor place to ponder them. Then, like a beacon of hope, a white wall of light appeared in front of him, the timer ticking away with a steady, relentless beat. 20 minutes left, the numbers seemed to scream, like a countdown to destiny. Ryo let out a sigh of relief, feeling like he had been given a reprieve, a second chance. He had thought it was over, that all was lost, but even after everything that had happened to them, it all seemed to have happened in a rather short amount of time. They had been given 1 hour for this challenge, and after 15 minutes of walking, they had encountered the Dark Prum. Only 25 minutes had passed, and yet, the battle had felt like an eternity, a never-ending cycle of pain and suffering. This, surely, was the influence of the Cardia beast, a monster that seemed to warp time and space to its own twisted will. As he stood there, lost in thought, Ryo pondered the implications of his growth, his mind working with its usual calm and methodical pace. He looked at the others, still broken, still shattered, and felt a sense of responsibility wash over him, like a wave crashing on the shore. He knew he had to find a way to help them, to help himself, to survive this ordeal and emerge stronger on the other side. The Cardia beast may have won this battle, but Ryo was focused on the war ahead. He would take his time, think things through, and come up with a plan. The timer was ticking, the clock was running, and Ryo was ready to take the next step, into the unknown. As the holy light emanating from Akari's left wrist intensified, it enveloped not only her but also the 7 individuals scattered around her. The creature recoiled, its eyes fixed on the group as if bewildered by their sudden revival. Ryo watched the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and detachment, his gaze lingering on Akari's serene face. She was the catalyst for this miracle, yet she seemed oblivious to her own role in their salvation. The others, however, were slowly regaining their senses. Kenzo stumbled to his feet, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if taking stock of their situation. His gaze locked onto the creature, and a flicker of fear danced across his face before he suppressed it. "It's stopped," he muttered, his voice laced with uncertainty. May's expression, normally a mask of calm detachment, was twisted in a scowl. "That thing violated our minds," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "I'm not going to let it go unpunished." Her eyes flashed with a fierce determination as she turned to the others. "There's a way to defeat this creature." But her words fell on deaf ears. The group's attention was focused on Akamitsu, who lay writhing in agony. The emotional onslaught had left him shattered, his mind reeling from the trauma. Tsukiko's knees buckled as she gazed at him, her body shaking with sobs. But then, with a newfound resolve, she straightened and turned to Kenzo. "Give me a sword." Kenzo hesitated for a moment before handing her a long, elegant sword. The blade seemed to shimmer in the fading light, and Tsukiko's left wrist glowed with a soft, pulsing energy. She turned to May, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "You have a plan in mind?" May's expression returned to its usual calm mask. "It's likely that the creature is currently experiencing some degree of confusion," she began, her voice detached and analytical. "Given the severity of the attack, it's probable that it expected us to be incapacitated or deceased by now. The fact that we're still functional is likely to be intriguing to it." She paused, her gaze flicking to the creature. According to the creature's behavioral patterns so far, creatures' visual capabilities basically are non-existent. And in addition to that, its vulnerability to sensory disruption suggests that dulling its senses might be a viable strategy for actually bringing it down. Ryo's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing as he processed May's words. A glimmer of understanding sparked within him, and he realized that his dark magic might hold the key to their survival. "I seem to have an ability that may be relevant to this situation." "I think," he said, his voice low and even. The group turned to him, their faces etched with a mix of hope and desperation. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide of this battle in their favor. The creature, sensing their newfound determination, let out a low growl, its eyes fixed on them with an unblinking gaze. The stage was set for a final, desperate confrontation. As Ryo's mind grasped the truth of his abilities, a spark of determination ignited within him. Kenzo's words, like a key turning in a lock, unleashed a floodgate of understanding. The way to harness his powers was almost laughably simple: just imagine and believe. Yet, for someone like Ryo, who had always struggled to tap into his emotions, it was a daunting task. He closed his eyes, focusing all his energy on conjuring the dark magic that had been simmering within him like a pent-up storm. His heart racing, he felt the familiar thrill of adrenaline coursing though his wind's lily in a cage. Ori no Naka no Yuri, Chapter 7, Beyond the Brink 7.6%. In that moment, the beast, which had until now ignored Ryo, suddenly sensed his presence. Its gaze snapped towards him like a whip cracking through the air, and it lunged forward with a ferocious roar that shook the very foundations of the earth. Chapter 8, Echoes of Sorrow. The others sprang into action, grabbing the swords Kenzo had crafted and scattering to defend themselves. Tsukiko, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination, charged forward with a polished stance, her sword held like a shurnai. The yellowish glow on her hands pulsed with an intense energy, a testament to her rage and frustration. Ryo, his eyes still closed, stretched forth his hands, and a dark smoke erupted from his fingertips, engulfing the beast like a shroud. The creature's senses were overwhelmed, its cracked, eye-like slits unable to target its prey's mind. It was vulnerable, its movements wild and unpredictable as it struck out in every direction like a mad thing. The air was electric with tension, the outcome hanging precariously in the balance. The plan had worked, but perhaps too well. May's eyes widened in surprise, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's take advantage of the situation. We should hit it with everything we've got, now." The words were like a spark to dry tinder, igniting a fierce determination within the group. They charged forward, their swords flashing in the dim light, their movements a whirlwind of steel and fury. Kenzo, his hands moving with a blur of speed, crafted sword after sword, supplying his comrades with an endless arsenal. Koki and Hitomi fought with reckless abandon, their movements a deadly dance of steel and magic. Akari, her eyes shining with a newfound understanding, focused her emotions on supporting her friends. Her support magic wove a subtle yet powerful spell, amplifying the group's strength and speed. As the battle raged on, the stakes grew higher. The group's fate, and that of the world, hung on the edge of a knife, waiting to see if their combined strength would be enough to vanquish the beast and shatter the darkness that threatened to consume them all. Ryo, his dark magic swirling around him, was the wild card, the unpredictable element that could tip the scales in their favor. The outcome was far from certain, but one thing was clear: only one side could emerge victorious. The battle was a fight to the finish, a clash of steel and magic that would leave only one side standing. Tsukiko's hands still glowed with a fierce, yellowish light as she charged forward with a speed that belied her slender frame. Her sword, held in a firm grip, sliced through the air with a deadly precision, aimed straight at the monster's twisted, nightmarish form. The beast, its senses blocked by Ryo's dark magic, flailed wildly, its massive claws swiping through the air with a deafening crash. As Tsukiko closed in, her sword flashed in the dim light, striking the monster with a force that sent shockwaves through the ground. The beast stumbled back, its movements wild and unpredictable, but Tsukiko pressed her advantage, her sword rising and falling in a deadly rhythm. Her movements were a blur of speed and agility, her feet dancing across the ground with a lightness that seemed almost supernatural. But the monster was far from defeated. As Tsukiko struck, it suddenly hardened its skin, the flesh transforming into a thick, armored hide that seemed almost impenetrable. Tsukiko's sword bit deep, but it was like striking stone, the blade shuddered and broke, the sound of shattering steel echoing through the air. Tsukiko's eyes widened in shock and frustration, but she didn't hesitate. She leapt back, avoiding the monster's retaliatory strike by a hair's breadth, as Kenzo rushed forward, a new sword at the ready. "Take this," he shouted, tossing the sword to Tsukiko, who caught it with a swift, practiced motion. The monster, its senses still blocked, flailed wildly, its claws striking the ground with a deafening crash. But Tsukiko was ready. With a fierce cry, she launched herself forward, the new sword flashing in the dim light. Her movements were a whirlwind of steel and fury, the sword striking the monster with a precision that seemed almost surgical. But even Tsukiko's skills were not enough to pierce the monster's armored hide. The sword bit deep, but it was like striking stone, the blade shuddered and stalled, unable to penetrate the thick, armored flesh. Tsukiko's face twisted in frustration and anger, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. And then, in a flash of inspiration, she remembered the words of her loved one, the man who had given his all to protect her. She recalled the memories of his weakness, of his agonizing over his inability to protect her. It was a pain that she knew all too well, a pain that fueled her movements and drove her forward. With a newfound strength, Tsukiko's arm glowed with an intense, pulsing light. Her body seemed to be enforced, her muscles tensing with a superhuman power. The sword, still lodged in the monster's hide, seemed to be infused with a new energy, an energy that seemed to pierce the armored flesh like a hot knife through butter. The monster let out a deafening roar as Tsukiko's sword finally pierced its hide, the blade sinking deep into its twisted, nightmarish form. The others, sensing their chance, rushed forward, their swords flashing in the dim light. Koki and Hitomi struck from either side, their blades sinking deep into the monster's flesh. Akari's support magic wove a subtle yet powerful spell, amplifying their strength and speed. Mei's voice was a steady presence, guiding them with her calm and level-headed strategy. And Ryo, his dark magic still swirling around him, blocked the monster's senses, preventing it from retaliating. Together, they pinned the monster down, their swords sinking deep into its flesh. Tsukiko, her arms still glowing with an intense, pulsing light, delivered the final blow, her sword striking the monster's heart with a deadly precision. The beast let out a deafening roar, its body shuddering and convulsing as it finally succumbed to their collective might. As the monster lay still, Tsukiko collapsed to the ground, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She sat beside the monster's lifeless body, her eyes fixed on its twisted form. For a moment, she felt a sense of victory, of pride and accomplishment. But as the reality of their situation set in, her emotions began to overwhelm her. The pain and the grief, the memories of her loved one, all came flooding back. Tsukiko's face contorted in a mixture of anger and sadness, her eyes welling up with tears. She let out a loud, primal scream, the sound echoing through the air as she released all her pent-up emotions. The others stood around her, their faces etched with concern and sympathy, but they knew better than to approach her. They gave her the space she needed, allowing her to process her emotions and come to terms with the trauma she had endured. As the scream faded away, Tsukiko's body shook with sobs, her shoulders heaving with each ragged breath. The forest was bathed in an eerie silence, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves and the faint whisper of Akamitsu's labored breathing. "Cough, cough, Tsu-ki-ko," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Tsukiko's heart sank as she rushed to his side, her eyes fixed on the gaping wound in his abdomen. The cardia beast's nightmarish effects had slowly worn off, but the damage had already been done. The human body, capable of holding at least 5 liters of blood, had lost most of it, leaving Akimitsu's life to slowly ebb away. Tsukiko's body vibrated with anguish, her legs and arms shaking like leaves in a storm. She gazed at Akimitsu, her eyes streaming with tears as she sobbed uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, I could do nothing for you. I was too weak. If I had been stronger, I could have stopped you from falling deep into despair. I could have done something." Her words trailed off, lost in the depths of her sorrow. Akimitsu's eyes, once bright and full of life, now dimly flickered like embers in the wind. "Tsukiko, I feel cold, my body won't move. Is this what dying feels like? I'm scared. My mom, she was glad I had found a job. What would she do? My dad is gone, who will support her?" His words were a heartbreaking litany of fear and regret, each one piercing Tsukiko's soul like a dagger. "I don't want to die, I don't want to die. I'm so scared. Everything is darkness, and I'm consumed by it. I can feel myself slipping away, and I'm terrified. I want to see your face, Tsukiko, but it's fading from my sight. Are you crying for me? Please, don't cry. I'm at peace, knowing I could protect you, even if it was just for a moment. I'm sorry, Tsukiko. Mom. I'm sorry I won't be able to be there for you, to support you, to see you smile again. Forgive me, Tsukiko. Mom." As Akimitsu's life slipped away, Tsukiko's desperation grew. She clutched his hand, her eyes locked on his, willing him to stay with her. "Akari, you have healing magic, right? Please help him, please, I'll do anything, just please." But it was too late. Akimitsu's eyes glazed over, his chest stilled, and his hand went limp in Tsukiko's grasp. The others watched in stunned silence, their faces etched with horror and helplessness. Was this the change Aetherion had promised? Was this the price they had to pay for their newfound powers? The questions swirled in their minds like a maelstrom, leaving them feeling lost and terrified. Tsukiko's scream of despair shattered the silence, a primal cry that echoed through the forest. Akari, overcome with grief, fell to her knees. In tears. Ryo, his eyes avoiding the scene, stood up and walked away, his body instinctively seeking escape from the pain and sorrow. Mei, her eyes fixed on Ryo's retreating back, followed him quietly, her footsteps barely making a sound. As they walked deeper into the forest, the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. "Why did you follow me?" Ryo asked, his voice tinged with annoyance. "You could have stayed with the others." Mei's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the turmoil that had just unfolded. "I understood where you were coming from," she said, her voice measured. "You wanted to move on, and I did too. Staying there wasn't going to achieve anything." Ryo's tone turned mocking, his words laced with sarcasm. "And you thought following me would achieve something?" Mei's response was swift, her voice devoid of emotion. "At least it's a change of scenery. And I have to admit, I'm curious to see what you'll do next." The verbal sparring that ensued was a fragile dance, each word a delicate step in an intricate ballet. Ryo and Mei's banter was a thin veil, hiding the depths of their emotions, the pain and the sorrow that they both sought to escape. "Well, I'm glad I can entertain you," Ryo said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But don't expect me to put on a show just for your benefit." "I wouldn't dream of it," Mei replied, her voice calm. "Besides, I think you're more likely to trip over your own feet than put on a decent show." Ryo's eyes narrowed, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "And I think you're more likely to get lost in your own thoughts than notice anyone else's feet. You're always so caught up in your own little world, aren't you?" Mei's response was swift, her voice laced with venom. "At least my world is more interesting than yours. Your life is as dull as a butter knife, useful for nothing except spreading boredom and monotony." Ryo's face twisted in a snarl, his voice rising. "And your life is as shallow as a kiddie pool, all surface and no depth. You're just a reflection of the people around you, with no substance or identity of your own." Mei's eyes flashed with anger, her voice dripping with malice. "I really hate your attitude, you know that, dash." Their bitter exchange was abruptly cut short as a brilliant white light descended from the sky, illuminating the dark forest with an otherworldly glow. The air seemed to vibrate with an electric tension as the light intensified, casting long shadows behind the trees. Ryo and Mei's eyes instinctively lily in a cage, Ori no Naka no Yuri, Chapter 8, Echoes of Sorrow 8. 69% W Yuma Sig 100 Well, the Unisterali signature of Aetherion's presence. The light was like a harbinger of fate, a herald of The unknown, and it seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Chapter 9. After the ink fades as Ryo and Mel's argument reached its crescendo, the air was electric with tension. The trees surrounding them seemed to loom over, their branches creaking softly in the wind, as if to witness the intensity of their exchange. The silence between them palpable, heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. But just as it seemed that their argument would escalate further, a brilliant light enveloped them, casting a warm glow over the forest floor. Aetherion's voice, low and soothing, cut through the din of their battle. "All right, let's get out of here." The light intensified, and Ryo felt himself being lifted off the ground, his eyes fixed on May as she was similarly transported. They were separated by a few feet, their gazes meeting briefly before they were both enveloped in the light. At the forests when the light dissipated, they found themselves edge, where they had first met Aetherion. The memories of that fateful encounter came flooding back, and Ryo's gaze swept across the familiar landscape. The trees, once green and vibrant, now stood as skeletal sentinels, their branches etched against the sky like a delicate pen and ink drawing. As they materialized, Ryo's eyes fell upon the group that had been transported alongside them. Tsukiko, her face a mask of grief, cradled Akimitsu's lifeless body in her arm. Tomi, Koki, and Kenzo stood nearby, their faces etched with Nan fatigue. Akari, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, stood a little apart, her gaze fixed on the ground as if unable to bear the sight of Akimitsu's body. May stood a short distance away, her eyes fixed on Ryo with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. The air was heavy with the weight of their collective sorrow, and Ryo could feel the pain and loss that hung over them like a shroud. Aetherion's presence seemed to loom over them, his silence a reminder that their time in Caliginia was far from over. The forest, once a place of mystery and wonder, now felt like a threshold to a darker, more sinister world. Ryo's heart quickened as he wondered what lay ahead, what challenges and terrors awaited them in the shadows. The only certainty was that they would be forced to face them together, as a group, bound by their shared experiences and their determination to survive. Tsukiko's gaze snapped towards Aetherion, her golden, beautiful eyes twisted in disgust and rage, like a masterpiece of art corrupted by the brushstrokes of madness. She stared at her eyes, once bright and shining like the sun, now blazed with a fierce intensity, like a tempest raging in the depths of her him with a venomous hatred, her gaze piercing through the air like a dagger, as if she could skewer him with a single glance. "It's because of you, all of this." She spat, her voice trembling with rage, the words tumbling out of her mouth like a curse. Her once beautiful face, a mess of tears, sweat, and dirt, was contorted in a snarl, her features twisted in a mixture of pain and anger. Her skin, once smooth and unblemished, was now smeared with grime and streaked with tears, her lips curled back in a snarl, revealing a hint of teeth. The beauty that had once been Tsukiko was marred by the ugliness of her emotions, her face a reflection of the turmoil that raged within. Aetherion's response was a grin, a cold, calculating smile that sent shivers down the spines of those around him. His eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, like a madman reveling in his own twisted desires. He said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, his tone a mocking echo of Tsukiko's anguish. "Oh. I'm sure I said there were no guarantees." As he spoke, Aetherion's grin grew wider, his excitement palpable, like a dark energy emanating from his very being. He seemed to feed off the suffering of others, his presence drawing sustenance from the pain and fear that surrounded him. "It makes sense that he'd be the first one to die," he continued, his words a cruel taunt, a heartless dismissal of Akimitsu's life. "All that said and done, you guys are really lucky. You encountered a spectre-level threat and survived with only one casualty, regardless of if it was a weaker one." Aetherion's gaze swept across the group, his eyes lingering on each of them with an unnerving intensity, as if he was savoring their fear and uncertainty. "I guess you have earned a pardon, this time," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, his tone implying that they should be grateful for his mercy. "My master is interested in you, my lilies," he added, his words a sinister whisper, a promise of darker things to come. As Aetherion spoke, the air around him seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening and twisting like living things. The group felt a creeping sense of dread, as if they were being pulled into a nig from which they couldn't awaken. A nightmare. Tsukiko's gaze never wavered, her eyes fixed on Aetherion with a fierce determination, as if she was daring him to take another step closer. The tension between them was palpable, a spark waiting to ignite into a blaze of violence and chaos. "You have all earned a reward. I've increased your traits by 5 and I'll be giving you food and shelter." As Aetherion's words hung in the air, the group's collective gaze fell upon their left wrists, where a soft, ethereal glow had begun to emanate. Ryo, Akari, and Kenzo exchanged knowing glances, their faces expressionless. They had already been aware of the scenario trait system, and the glow was merely a confirmation of their existing abilities. Tsukiko, on the other hand, stared at her wrist with a mixture of numbness and despair. The glow seemed to mock her, a cruel reminder of the power she had been unable to use to Akamitsu. Her eyes scanned the list of traits, her mind dulled by grief. Scenario of the Swords Aspirant. Swordsmanship, Stage 12. Hand-to-hand combat, Stage 5. Sword Mage, Stage 5. Acrobatics, Stage 7. Stamina, Stage 6. The words blurred together on the screen, meaningless in the face of her loss. Tsukiko's eyes felt dry and empty, her heart heavy with sorrow. Mel's gaze fell upon her own wrist, her expression unreadable. The dark purple glow seemed to suit her mood, and she regarded the list of traits with a detached interest. Scenario of Darkness's Aspirant. Shadow Stealth, Stage 5. Darkness Manipulation, Stage 7. Dark Magic, Stage 6. Fear Inducement, Stage and Shadow Conjuring, Stage 12. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she in the information, her mind working overtime to process the implications. But her face remained a mask, giving away nothing of her thoughts or feelings. The group stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts and emotions. Aetherion's words had brought them a measure of comfort, a small consolation in the face of their losses and uncertainties. Aetherion's voice dripped with an unsettling enthusiasm as he spoke, his red eyes glimmering with an otherworldly light. The next page will begin in a week, so until that time, I'll be giving you a place to stay. I've already made arrangements for that. The creature's words were laced with a se of self-satisfaction, as if he was proud of his own generosity. The others, however, were not so easily swayed. They still harbored hostile feelings towards Aetherion, their faces a mixture of anger, resentment, and suspicion. But they said nothing, their silence a testament to the reality of their situation. They wished for change, and now they had it. Whether they liked it or not, they were bound to this world, subject to the whims of the creature before them. Ryo, however, seemed to be an exception. His expression was neutral, his eyes betraying no emotion. Up until this point, his life had been a constant loop of mundane activities, a never-ending cycle of routine and predictability. But this was different. This was excitement, this was uncertainty, and it was a spark that had ignited a fire within him. But as he turned to look at Akamitsu's lifeless body, he couldn't help but wonder worth it the thrill of the unknown, worth risking his life. As he gazed at Akamitsu's body, he noticed something strange. A green glow had begun to emanate from the corpse, and an image flashed in Ryo's mind. He recalled the strange waterfall he had encountered before, the one with the same green glow. It seems it has begun, Aetherion said, his eyes glinting with an even more sinister excitement. Akamitsu's body began to break apart, like green glowing sand evaporating into the air. Tsukiko watched with a pained expression, her eyes welling up with tears. The others were dumbfounded, their faces frozen in shock and horror. Aetherion's like a cold wind, cutting through the silence. You see, this is what happens when something with strong emotions like you humans die in this world. Your bodies will turn into energy that will fuel the birth of life elsewhere. The creature's words were like a cruel joke, a heartless explanation for the brutal reality of their situation. As the green glow dissipated, leaving nothing but a faint memory of Akamitsu's presence, the group was left to grapple with the implications of Aetherion's words. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting to maintain their existence, and in this world, death was end, but a transformation, a fuel for the cycle of life and death that governed this twisted realm. Let's leave this place now, Aetherion said, his voice dripping with an air of finality. The location I've temporarily prepared for you is just a little further down the forest. But fear not, I will teleport us there. Tsukiko's eyes narrowed, her gaze still fixed on the spot where Akamitsu's body had vanished. What's the point of all this? She spat, her voice laced with venom. Why are you doing this to us? Aetherion's grin was like a crack in the earth, splitting his face into a grotesque smile. Ah, my dear Tsukiko, you LD not understand. But rest assured, this is all part of the grand design. And you, my lilies, much larger than yourselves, re-pawns in a game. Ryo's eyes flicked to Aetherion, his expression unreadable. What do you mean by the grand design? He asked, his voice neutral. Aetherion's chuckle a rustling of dry leaves. All in due time, my young friend. All in due time. For now, let us focus on getting you settled into your new accommodations. Shall we? As Aetherion's words hung in the air, the group felt a strange sensation. Like the very fabric of reality was bending to accommodate their transportation. The air around them shimmered and distorted, like the surface of a pond struck by a stone, and the sounds of the forest grew fainter, replaced by a soft, ethereal humming. When the distortion cleared, they found themselves standing in a small clearing, surrounded by a ring of towering trees that seemed to stretch up to the sky like giant pillars. Aetherion's grin was still plastered on his face, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Welcome, my lilies, to your new home. For the time being, at least." In the center of the clearing, a wooden tree-like house emerged from the ground, its trunk decayed and gnarled, its branches twisted and curved in impossible ways. The house seemed to grow organically from the earth, as if it had been planted there like a seed and had sprouted into being. The group approached the house, their footsteps quiet on the soft, moss-covered ground. Unassuming exterior, the interior of the house with as they entered the house, they rocked by its sheer despite its corridors that seemed to tch on forever. The walls were made of and warm, honey-colored wood, and the blooming flowers filled with the sweet scent of. Ryo wandered over to a uniquely shaped window beside him, its twisted and curved like a living vine. He stared out at the never-ending twilight sky, where 3 moons hung suspended like lanterns in the darkness. The sky was a deep, rich purple, and the stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across the fabric of the universe. As he gazed out at the breathtaking view, he noticed a flock of creatures flitting through the trees, their wings beating in unison as they sang a sweet, melodic song. They were cardia beasts, but not the fearsome predators they had encountered earlier. These creatures were small and delicate, with feathers that shimmered like the moon and eyes that sparkled like they were harmless, and Ryo felt a sense of wonder and awe as he watched them dance through the trees. "What are those creatures?" he asked Aetherion, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ah, those are the Luminari," Aetherion replied, his voice filled with a deep affection. "They are a type of cardia beast, but they are quite harmless. In fact, they are considered to be good luck charms in many parts of this world." As Ryo continued to gaze out at the Luminari, he noticed other creatures flitting through the trees. There were grumbles, small, furry creatures that seemed to be made of living shadow, and malakars, tall, stately creatures with skin like dark, polished wood and eyes that glowed like embers. Housed by a veritable menagerie of fantastical creatures, each one more breathtaking than the last. Ryo felt as though he had stumbled into a dream world, a place where the boundaries between reality and fantasy were blurred and anything was possible. As he turned away from the window, with an awkward silence. The others staring at him, but their faces were expressionless, their eyes haunted by the memories of what had happened earlier. No one spoke, the only sound the soft hum of the house and the distant singing of the Luminari. The silence oppressive, a heavy blanket that suffocated them all. Ryo looked away, feeling a of discomfort wash over him. He didn't know these people, and they didn't know him. They were all strangers, brought together by circumstance, and the tension between them was palpable. Aetherion, seemingly oblivious to the awkwardness, smiled to himself as he watched them. "Till leave you all to get settled," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "You have a week before the next page begins. I suggest you use that time to rest and prepare yourselves. You'll also need to hunt for food, as one won't be providing it for you." He gestured to a small clearing outside the window. "There are creatures that nest in the nearby trees, called fizzlekins. They're small, rodent-like creatures with sweet, nutty flavor. They're easy to catch and make for a good meal. You can also forage for edible plants, such as the starlight bloom and the moon petal. They're both safe to eat and can be found in the surrounding area." Ryo's eyes widened as he looked at the kitchen, which surprisingly well stocked with ingredients similar to those found in their own world. "You'll find that the kitchen is equipped with everything you need to prepare your meals," Aetherion continued. "The fizzlekins can be roasted over open flame, and the starlight bloom can be sautéed in a pan with some oil and herbs. The moon petal makes for a good tea. Simply steep the leaves in hot water and enjoy." As Aetherion finished speaking, he turned and disappeared, leaving the group to their uncomfortable silence. Ryo looked around at the others. No, they all they're frozen in there. Lily in a cage chapter fades. The kitchen, however, seemed to be a different story. Ryo's eyes wandered back to countertops, where he saw familiar ingredients like flour, sugar, and spices. The strange, exotic spices that he didn't recognize, but they seemed to be arranged in a way that suggested they were meant to be used in cooking. He noticed a small cookbook on the counter, bound in a strange, scaly material. As he opened it, he filled with recipes that seemed to be tailored to the ingredients available in this world. There were recipes for fizzlekin stew, starlight bloom salad, and moonpetal tea. Ryo's stomach growled as he flipped through the pages, his mind racing with the possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, this place wouldn't be so bad after all. Chapter 10, Shadows and Steel. A few hours had passed since Aetherion's sudden departure, and the group's silence had grown thick and heavy. Each member had retreated to their own private world, struggling to process the events that had transpired. The memories of Caliginia still lingered, the Dark Prum's twisted games, the Cardia Beast's brutal attack leaving an indelible mark on their minds. The weight of those memories hung in the air, making it difficult for them to meet each other's gaze. Ryo's stomach growled, breaking the spell of silence. Hey, I'm starving. You guys must be too, right? Being in another world doesn't mean our stomach stayed in Japan, he said, his tone devoid of emotion, yet laced with a hint of dry humor. As Ryo spoke, the doors to the other rooms creaked open, and the group slowly emerged, their faces etched with a mix of fatigue and curiosity. Akari's eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, as she hesitantly stepped out of her room. I am hungry too, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Hitomi, on the other hand, looked like she was ready to take on the world. Her eyes blazed with determination, her jaw set in a firm line. About time someone mentioned food, she said, her voice firm and confident. We can't just sit around twiddling our thumbs. We need to get moving. Mei, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, her voice cold and sharp. Finally, someone mentions food. I'm starving. Let's get moving already. She glared at the group, her eyes flashing with impatience. We can't just sit around feeling sorry for ourselves. We need to focus on survival. Koki, lost in thought, looked up at Ryo with a gentle smile. He's right, we do need to eat. The smile caught Ryo off guard, and he let out a soft sigh, his expression a mask of mild discomfort. Kenzo, ever the pragmatist, spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. We're gonna need weapons for hunting the fizzlekins, right? He began crafting 6 weapons with swift, precise movements, his hands a blur as he worked. As he handed out the weapons, his eyes met Tsukiko's, and he hesitated. She looked exhausted, the weight of her loss and the battle against the Cardia Beast still etched on her face. Kenzo's gaze faltered, and he struggled to meet her eyes. You can sit this one out, he said, his voice softening. Tsukiko didn't respond, but her actions spoke louder than words. She took the offer and retreated into one of the rooms, leaving the others to prepare for the hunt. The group exchanged glances, the silence between them still oppressive, but with a hint of understanding. They knew that they had to work together, to rely on each other if they were to survive in this unforgiving world. With a deep breath, they set out, their footsteps echoing through the stillness, as they ventured into the unknown to hunt for sustenance. 2 days had passed, and the group had begun to settle into their new environment, slowly shedding the awkward silence that had once suffocated them. They had made a collective decision to push aside the memories of their traumatic experience, choosing instead to focus on survival and growth. Tsukiko, still nursing the emotional wounds of her past, had come to realize that inaction would only lead to stagnation. With a newfound determination, she joined her companions in their daily training and hunting regimen. Their routine took them deep into the heart of the forest, where they had discovered a realm teeming with crawler-level threats. Krails and Malisters, creatures with a dim yellowish icon hovering above their heads, had become their unwitting training partners. Ryo, ever the pragmatist, had dedicated himself to honing his threat perception, allowing him to alert the group to potential dangers. He had also begun to master his dark magic, learning to dull the senses of their foes or create a smoke screen to conceal their attacks. The magic, it seemed, had no effect on the Malister's senses, but it could also amplify Ryo's speed and strength, making him a formidable opponent. Koki, meanwhile, had been perfecting his skills as a thief. His scenario of the thief's aspirant had granted him access to a range of abilities, including Umbrahide, Starclimb, Foresight, and Moon Whisper. With Foresight, he could anticipate the creature's movements, while Moon Whisper, a deadly strike fueled by the moon's light, had become his most potent attack. However, the skill came at a cost, leaving Koki exhausted if used more than 3 times. Hitomi, the group's summoner, had also made significant strides. Her scenario of the summoner's aspirant, had allowed her to develop a range of skills, including Summon Familiar, Entity Communion, Aura of Protection, and Magical Bind. With her familiar, a bird-like creature named Ryu, she could shield her allies from harm and aid them in combat. Ryu's presence was a comforting one, and the group had grown to rely on its support. Akari, the group's cleric, had been working tirelessly to boost her companion's movements and attacks. Her divine magic allowed her to heal wounds and protect herself from harm, making her an invaluable asset to the team. Mei, meanwhile, had mastered the art of fear inducement, using her dark magic to keep their enemies at bay. Her abilities were versatile, allowing her to blind or trap her foes in a dark cloak, or attack them with a dark flame. But it was Tsukiko who had made the most remarkable progress. Her movements and power had become a wonder to behold, leaving her companions in awe. Kenzo's weapons, once durable and reliable, now barely lasted a few minutes in her hands. Her growth was rapid, and Kenzo found himself crafting fewer weapons for the group, instead focusing on creating specialized tools for Tsukiko, Mei, and Ryo. The alchemist's skills, it seemed, had also had and became, making him a formidable ally in combat. Unexpected benefit, the more he crafted, the stronger his muscles. The last day of their training had finally arrived, and the group stood at the edge of the forest, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the trees seemed to loom over them, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. Aetherion, the being they had been expecting, had already arrived, its presence palpable in the air. As they waited, Ryo stood tall, his expression as cold and unreadable as ever. His eyes were fixed intently on the horizon, his gaze piercing and unyielding. As he had come to know the others better, Ryo's reserve had begun to thaw, but only slightly, and his expression still betrayed little of the emotions that lay beneath. Yet, there was a subtle sense of tension in his stance, a hint of anticipation that betrayed his otherwise impassive exterior. Koki, meanwhile, seemed lost in thought, his eyes gazing out at the trees as if searching for something. Hitomi stood beside him, her familiar, Ryu, perched on her shoulder, its eyes gleaming with a fierce inner light. Mei and Akari stood together, their faces set with determination, their eyes fixed on the horizon. And Tsukiko, the group's wild card, stood at the edge of the group, her eyes flashing with a fierce energy. Lily in a Cage, Ori no Naka no Yuri, Chapter 10, Shadows and Steel 10.86% Trees, its presence like a storm on the horizon. Aetherion had arrived, and the group steeled themselves for what was to come. Ryo's gaze narrowed, his eyes locked onto the figure, his expression unchanging. But there was a sense of focus, of intensity, that seemed to emanate from him, a sense that he was ready for whatever lay ahead. Chapter 11, The Road to Gryon. The twilight sky cast a dim, ethereal glow over the forest, illuminated by the soft light of the 3 moons that hung in the sky like lanterns. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the trees stood like sentinels, their branches etched against the sky like a delicate pen and ink drawing. As the group moved through the forest, the trees seemed to loom over them, their branches tangling together above their heads like skeletal fingers. The trees' bark was dry and cracked, their leaves wilted and brown, as if they were perpetually dying. This was no natural phenomenon, but rather a reaction to the presence of humans, for the trees were sensitive to the cardia magia that flowed through the world. Whenever humans touched the trees, they would wither and dry up, as if the very life force was being drained from them. As the group journeyed deeper into the woods, the trees grew closer together, their branches seeming to reach out like grasping fingers. The group encountered a clearing, and in its center, a pair of Krails and Malisters, their dim yellowish icons hovering above their heads like a warning. The creatures were twisted and grotesque, their bodies a mass of writhing, pulsing tendrils, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. The air around them seemed to distort and ripple, as if reality itself was being warped by their presence. Ryo, ever the pragmatist, took point, his eyes fixed intently on the creatures. He raised a hand, and a dark, misty energy erupted from his palm, shrouding the creatures in a smoke screen. Now, he shouted, and the group sprang into action. Koki darted forward, his agility and quick reflexes allowing him to weave between the creatures' attacks. He struck with precision, his moon whisper ability unleashing a deadly, moon-powered strike that bit deep into the creature's flesh. The moonlight seemed to amplify his strength, and his blade sliced through the air with a soft, ethereal glow. Hitomi followed close behind, her familiar, Ryu, soaring above the battlefield, its wings beating fiercely as it unleashed a barrage of magical attacks. Mei, meanwhile, stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed intently on the creatures. She raised a hand, and a dark, flame-like energy erupted from her palm, engulfing one of the Krails. The creature let out a deafening screech as it stumbled and fell, its body consumed by the flames. Akari, ever the support specialist, stood ready, her divine magic at the ready to heal any wounds that might be inflicted. Tsukiko, the group's wild card, charged forward with a fierce battle cry, her movements a blur as she struck with precision and power. Her sword sliced through the air, biting deep into the creature's flesh, and her feet moved with a speed and agility that belied her strength. Kenzo, the group's alchemist, stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed intently on the battle. He was ready to provide support, his muscles tensed and ready to spring into action. The battle raged on, the group working in perfect tandem as they took down the creatures. The air was filled with the sound of clashing steel, the scent of sweat and blood, and the cries of the creatures as they fell. The trees seemed to loom over them, their branches creaking ominously in the wind, as if they were watching the battle with cold, calculating eyes. It was a chaotic, intense scene, one that tested the group's skills and their bond. As the last creature fell, the group stood victorious, their chests heaving with exhaustion. They had worked together seamlessly, their abilities complementing each other in ways they never thought possible. The forest, once a threat, had become a mere obstacle, a challenge to be overcome as they continued to grow and evolve. And as they caught their breath, they exchanged nods of respect and admiration, their faces set with a newfound sense of determination and purpose. Ryo's gaze shifted to the group, a faint, subtle curve of his lips suggesting a hint of amusement, though his expression remained otherwise impassive. "Not bad," he said, his voice low and rough. The group chuckled, their laughter echoing through the forest, and for a moment, they forgot about the dangers that lurked within the woods. They stood together, their bond strengthened by their shared victory, and their eyes looked out towards the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The familiar light shone through the forest, and Aetherion, the mischievous and malicious creature, hovered above them. His wings, which seemed to be a part of his being, shone behind him, radiating an otherworldly energy. He looked impressed, his eyes gleaming with a hint of surprise. Aetherion's presence was met with a mixture of unease and hostility from the group. They eyed him warily, their faces set with suspicion and distrust. Aetherion, however, seemed to revel in their discomfort, his face splitting into a wide, malicious grin. "Ah, you've grown so much in such a short time," Aetherion said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I must admit, I'm impressed. You've learned to work together, to trust each other, and to harness your unique abilities. Well done, my lilies." As he spoke, Aetherion's grin grew even wider, his eyes glinting with malevolence. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their faces set with hostility. "Now, I suppose it's time for me to reveal a little more about the world you're in," Aetherion said, his voice taking on a slightly more serious tone. "You see, this world, the Mirror Realm, is not as empty as you might think. There are settlements, of a sort. Places where beings like yourselves, born of Cardiamagia, have formed communities and societies. And one of these places is the city of Gryon, the grim city of the unknown." The group's eyes widened in surprise, their faces reflecting their shock and curiosity. Aetherion's grin returned, and he continued. "Gryon is a place of wonder and danger, where the fabric of reality is thin and the power of Cardiamagia is strong. And it's where you'll be heading next. But first, you'll need to cross the desert of Zrakan a dunes stretch out as far as the eye can see, treacherous place where the sun beats down relentlessly in the sand." Aetherion snapped his fingers, and a burst of energy enveloped the group. When the light faded, they found themselves standing in front of a row of mirrors. Aetherion gestured to the mirrors, and the group saw their reflections staring back at them. "Ah, but you can't very well show up in the city looking like that, can you?" Aetherion said, his eyes scanning their ragged attire. "Ryo, your jacket and shirt are in tatters. Tsukiko, your pants and top are barely holding together. And the rest of you, your school uniforms are in a sorry state. It's time for a change of clothes, don't you think?" With a sweeping motion of his hands, Aetherion conjured a whirlwind of colors and fabrics, enveloping each of the group members in a vortex of transformation. The air was filled with the soft rustle of silk, the creak of leather, and the faint hum of magical energy as their clothes were rewritten to suit their new roles. As the whirlwind dissipated, the group gazed at each other in wonder, taking in their new attire. Ryo was dressed in a sleek black outfit, complete with a dark katana-like sword at his side. The sword, adorned with intricate designs, seemed to absorb the light around it, giving it an otherworldly aura. Tsukiko, on the other hand, was clad in a suit of leather armor, her blade strapped to her back. The blade, a curved and deadly scimitar, was adorned with small, shimmering gemstones that seemed to reflect the light of the three moons. The scimitar's hilt was wrapped in an intricate pattern of leather and silver, and its blade seemed to hum with a subtle magical energy. Mei was given a short sword, its blade inscribed with runes that glowed with a soft, blue light. She was dressed in a sleek, high-collared outfit, adorned with intricate, silver embroidery. Her outfit seemed to be designed for mobility and stealth, and her sword seemed to be an extension of her own body. Akari, the cleric, was dressed in a flowing white robe, adorned with intricate, golden embroidery. Her staff, adorned with small, delicate carvings, seemed to pulse with a gentle, healing energy. A small, crystal pendant hung around her neck, glowing with a soft, white light. Hitomi, the summoner, was dressed in a flowing, hooded cloak, adorned with intricate, mystical symbols. Her little stick-like wand, adorned with small, shimmering gemstones, seemed to be attuned to her summoning abilities, and she could feel the power of Cardia Magia coursing through it. Kenzo, the alchemist, was dressed in a long, leather coat, adorned with intricate, brass buttons. His dimensional pocket bag, adorned with intricate, swirling patterns, seemed to be limitless in its capacity. A small, crystal vial hung around his neck, glowing with a soft, blue light. Koki, the thief, was dressed in a sleek, black outfit, adorned with intricate, silver embroidery. His dagger, slender and deadly, seemed to be imbued with a subtle, magical energy that would allow him to strike with precision and stealth. A small, leather pouch hung at his belt, containing a variety of lockpicks and thieves' tools. Aetherian's face brimmed with enthusiasm as he surveyed his handiwork, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Ah, yes, much better," he said. "Now you look like a group worthy of facing the challenges that lie ahead." Aetherian's grin returned, wider and more malicious than ever. "And now, I'll give you something to help you on your journey. Water, in the form of these sacks." He handed each of them a strange, sack-like container filled with a clear, liquid substance. "These will keep you hydrated, even in the harshest of environments. And with that, I'll transport you to the desert of Zrakan. May the odds be ever in your favor, my lilies." With a wave of his hand, the group felt themselves being lifted off the ground and transported to the desert of Zrakan. The sun beat down on them, relentless and unforgiving, and the sand dunes stretched out before them like an endless sea. Chapter 12, A Path of Peril. As the group materialized in the desert of Zrakan, they stumbled and staggered, disoriented from the sudden transportation. They were met with a sight that left them breathless. The desert of Zrakan stretched out before them like an endless sea, with sand dunes rising and falling like waves. In the distance, majestic mountains pierced the sky, their rugged peaks shrouded in a haze of heat. The scorching sun beat down on them, its intense rays making them squint. Ryo raised a hand to shield his eyes, his gaze drifting upward to take in the sight of the sun. It was the first time they had seen a sun in this world, and it was a stark contrast to the perpetual twilight of the forest. "Whoa, look at that," Koki exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. "The sun's so bright. And the moons are still visible," Akari added, her voice filled with awe. "It's so beautiful." As they gazed up at the sky, they noticed creatures hovering in the distance. They looked like smaller dragons, with scales that shimmered like gemstones in the sunlight. Their wings beat slowly, casting a mesmerizing pattern of shadows on the sand. "Those are draconets," May said, her voice detached as she consulted the book Aetherion had given them. "Harmless creatures, according to this. They're native to the desert." As they watched, a group of scarvics scurried across the sand. The insects had transparent bodies, their internal organs visible like a living anatomy lesson. "Ugh, what are those things?" Hitomi asked, her nose wrinkled in. "You distanced yourself." "Scarvics," Kenzo replied, his eyes fixed on the creatures. "They're harmless, but they can be a nuisance if they swarm." The group also spotted other creatures, like the towering, lumbering Grodius, with their shaggy coats and curved tusks. There were the iridescent, winged creatures known as luminari, which flitted about like giant butterflies. As they took in the sights and sounds of the desert, the group realized that Aetherion had left them without any guidance on how to reach the city of Gryon. "Okay, so we're just supposed to wander around until we find the city?" Ryo asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "I guess so," Koki replied, shrugging. "Aetherion didn't exactly give us a map or anything." Just as they were starting to get frustrated, they noticed that their wrists were glowing. A soft, green light emanated from the markings, casting an ethereal glow on the sand. "Wait, what's going on?" Akari asked, her eyes wide with wonder. The light grew brighter, illuminating a path in the sky. The group followed the path with their eyes, their faces set with determination. "Let's move," Ryo said, his voice blunt. "We're not getting anywhere standing here." Without another word, the group set off, their eyes fixed on the glowing path as they journeyed deeper into the desert. As they walked, the sun beat down on them, its rays relentless. But they pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose and determination. As they trudged on, the path stretched out before them like an endless serpent, its winding course punctuated by the relentless beat of the sun. The heat was a palpable force, draining their strength with each step, leaving them parched and exhausted. Yet, they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that their canteens, miraculously, refused to run dry. Aetherion's parting gift, those deceptively ordinary sacks, had proven to be a lifeline, their water replenishing itself with a subtle, mystical efficiency. Tsukiko's eyes widened as she gazed into her sack, the last dregs of water seemingly replenished by an invisible hand. "This is incredible," she breathed, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the wind. Ryo, meanwhile, struggled to keep pace, his stamina flagging beneath the unforgiving sun. Despite the rigorous training they had undergone, his physical limitations still lingered, a constant reminder of his own mortality. He gritted his teeth, willing himself forward, as the group approached the base of a towering, mountain-like elevation. The path, it seemed, led inexorably upward, a daunting prospect that drew a collective sigh from the group. "Well, this looks fun," Koki muttered, his eyes fixed on the ascent ahead. "Just what we needed," May added, her voice laced with sarcasm. "More climbing." Ryo's expression remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "Let's get moving," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We're not going to reach Gryon by standing around." With a shared sense of trepidation, the group began their ascent, their footsteps echoing off the rocky face as they climbed higher into the unforgiving vastness of the desert. As the sun's fiery orb dipped below the horizon, the group's exhaustion reached a boiling point. The three moons, now the sole sources of illumination, cast an ethereal glow over the desert landscape, their silvery light a meager comfort against the crushing fatigue that threatened to consume them. The air was heavy with the scent of sand and sweat, and the only sound was the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Ryo's threat perception, a unique ability that allowed him to sense danger, flared to life, warning him of an impending threat. His breath caught in his throat as he felt the weight of the creature's gaze upon them. He tried to speak, to warn the others, but his voice was frozen in his throat. Before he could find the words, the ground beneath them began to shudder and tremble. The group's heads snapped back, their eyes fixed on the horror that emerged from the darkness. A sandwraith, its body a twisted mass of writhing sand and shadow, rose up behind them, its presence like a cold wind that sent shivers down their spines. May's words, spoken hours ago, came back to haunt them. A sandwraith is a lesser beast-level threat, one of the stronger kinds. We wouldn't stand a chance against it, especially not in its own territory, and certainly not in our current state. Akari's hands flashed out, her fingers weaving intricate patterns as she summoned a burst of supportive energy. The group's speed increased, their legs pumping furiously as they sprinted across the sand. Kenzo swept Akari into his arms, his muscles straining beneath her weight. "Hold on, I've got you," he shouted, his voice carrying above the din of their ragged breathing. As they ran, Ryo spotted a dark opening in the distance, a cave that seemed to yawn open like a mouth in the side of a hill. "There," he shouted, pointing towards the cave. "We can lose it in there." The group surged towards the cave, their feet pounding out a frantic rhythm on the sand. Kenzo, despite being burdened with Akari's weight, kept pace with the others, his physical conditioning allowing him to power through the exhaustion. Akari, meanwhile, clung to his neck, her long robe fluttering behind her like a banner. As they reached the cave, the sandwraith was mere steps behind, its jaws open wide in a scream of rage. But the group had already slipped inside, the cave's narrow opening too small for the beast to follow. The sandwraith's claws scrabbled against the stone, its body crashing against the entrance in a frenzy of fury, but the cave held firm, its ancient walls withstanding the creature's violent attempts to break through. As they caught their breath, Kenzo shot Akari a wry glance. "You know, you're not exactly the lightest person to carry." Akari's face flushed, but she smiled, her eyes sparkling with mirth. "Hey, I'm not that heavy." Kenzo chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh, really? Then why do I feel like I've been running with a sack of sand?" The group's laughter, though strained, helped to ease the tension, their shared relief a palpable thing in the darkness of the cave. But as they looked back, they knew that the sandwraith was still out there, waiting for them, its patience wearing thin. They couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, they would have to face the creature, and the desert, once more. As the last remnants of sunlight faded, casting the desert in a deep, indigo hue, Ryo broke the silence, his voice low and even. "We should rest here for the night. Take turns keeping watch." The others nodded in agreement, their faces etched with exhaustion. The sandwraith's departure had brought a measure of relief, but the desert's nighttime chill was already beginning to seep into their bones. The air was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the blistering heat they had endured during the day. Kenzo, ever the pragmatist, volunteered to gather firewood, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for suitable kindling. Ryo, come with me, he said, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of intent. Ryo hesitated, his expression unreadable. He wasn't eager to venture back out into the cold, dark night, but something in Kenzo's request stayed his refusal. He sensed that there was more to Kenzo's invitation than met the eye. As the others settled into rest, Ryo and Kenzo set out into the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the rocky outcroppings. The silence between them was awkward, punctuated only by the occasional snap of a twig or the distant howl of a nocturnal creature. Ryo's discomfort grew, his face a mask of impassivity. "Is there something you want to talk to me about, Kenzo?" he asked, his voice low and even. "You wouldn't have asked me to come with you otherwise." Kenzo stopped, his back to Ryo, and took a deep breath. When he turned, his expression was serious, his eyes narrowed. "I've been thinking about our time in Caliginia, when we fought the Darkprum. Do you remember how it didn't seem to notice you, even when we were forced to invade each other's memories?" Ryo's gaze didn't waver, but his mind was racing. He had noticed it himself, but hadn't given it much thought. Kenzo's eyes locked onto Ryo's, his voice barely above a whisper. "It didn't look at you, Ryo. It didn't perceive you. And when we saw each other's memories, there was nothing about you. It was as if you weren't there." The silence that followed was oppressive, heavy with unspoken suspicion. Ryo didn't respond, his thoughts consumed by the implications of Kenzo's words. Was it luck, or was there something more to it? He didn't know, and he didn't care. They had come out here to find firewood, not to indulge in speculation. The awkward silence continued, punctuated only by the sound of their footsteps, until they stumbled upon a dried-up tree, its branches brittle and worn. They cut it into bits, the sound of their labored breathing and the crunch of the wood the only sounds in the stillness of the night. As they prepared to head back, the tension between them remained, a palpable, unspoken thing. As they returned to the cave, the chill of the night air still lingered, but the promise of warmth and comfort beckoned. Kenzo and Ryo set about arranging the firewood, their hands moving in tandem as they constructed a small pyre. Hitomi's familiar, a bird-like creature with feathers of iridescent sheen, perched on a nearby rock, watching with curious eyes. At Hitomi's gentle command, the creature spread its wings, and a small puff of flame erupted from its beak, kindling the wood. The fire crackled to life, casting a warm, golden glow over the cave. The others settled in, their weary bodies grateful for the respite. Kenzo took the first watch, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the cave entrance, his back straight and alert. Ryo watched him for a moment, his gaze lingering on the sharp lines of Kenzo's profile, before his eyelids grew heavy, and he succumbed to sleep. The night passed, a blur of fitful rest and watchful vigilance. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the group stirred, their movements slow and stiff. They broke their fast with a meager meal, their canteens still miraculously full, thanks to Aetherion's mysterious blessing. As they set out once more, the desert sun rose higher in the sky, its rays beating down upon them like a relentless drumbeat. The group trudged on, their footsteps sinking into the sand, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter or respite. The landscape stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of dunes and rocky outcroppings. But as they walked, a creeping sense of unease began to settle over them. The air grew thick with an ominous energy, like the whispered promise of a storm. The group exchanged nervous glances, their senses on high alert. Something was waiting for them, lurking just beyond the next dune or rocky outcropping. Ryo's threat perception stirred, his instincts screaming warning signals in his mind. He scanned their surroundings, his oves narrowed against Lily in a cage, Ori no Naka no Yuri, Chapter 12, A Path of Peril 13.04%. Yet, the feeling persisted, a growing sense of dread that seeped into his bones. "We need to be careful," May said, her voice low and cautious. "This feels wrong." The others nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They knew that the desert was full of dangers, and that they had to be prepared to face whatever lay ahead. But as they crested the next dune, a chill ran down their spines, and they knew that they were walking into something truly sinister. Chapter 13, The Dunes of Madness. As they trudged through the desert's unforgiving expanse, their throats grew parched, the dry air sucking the moisture from their lips like a malevolent entity. The water in their sacks, replenished by the mystical forces of Aetherion, seemed to tantalize them, its coolness a fleeting respite from the crushing thirst that threatened to consume them. With each sip, their thirst only intensified, as if the water itself was a cruel joke, teasing them with promises of relief it couldn't deliver. The air was heavy with an ominous energy, like the whispered warnings of a forgotten prophet. Time lost all meaning as they walked, the sun beating down upon them like a hammer, its position in the sky a constant reminder that hours, maybe even days, had passed, though they couldn't quite recall. The world around them grew distorted, the dunes blurring together like a mad artist's canvas, as the group's collective sense of unease deepened. Akari's scream shattered the oppressive silence, her fragile form crumpling to the sand as if struck by an invisible hand. Kenzo and Hitomi rushed to her side, their faces etched with concern, but they too were soon overcome, their bodies racked by violent tremors as they stumbled aside to retch. Tsukiko, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene, realized that this was no ordinary illness. The desert's harsh conditions couldn't explain the sudden, simultaneous onset of fever and weakness that had afflicted them all. As they fell, one by one, like dominoes in a cruel game, Ryo was the last to succumb, his body weakened by the relentless assault of the desert's malevolent forces. Koki, surprisingly resilient, stood tall for a moment, his eyes wide with fear, before he too felt the creeping tendrils of sickness wrap around his ankles, pulling him down into the abyss. The group lay there, their faces flushed with fever, their teeth chattering like loose window blinds in a hurricane, as the desert's silence closed in around them like a shroud. It was as if they had stumbled into a realm of madness, where the laws of nature no longer applied, and the very fabric of reality was twisted and distorted. Kenzo, his mind foggy with sickness, struggled to recall the words of the book Aetherion had given them. His trait, catalytic insight, kicked in, and the memories came flooding back. He remembered a passage that spoke of a creature that could induce such a state of feverish hallucinations in the desert. A Kalindra, a ghostly Cardia beast, said to haunt the dunes, its presence a harbinger of doom for those who dared to cross its path. The Kalindra, a creature of dark legend, was said to appear as a shimmering mirage, its body a twisted mass of ethereal tendrils and glowing, otherworldly orbs. Its gaze was rumored to be able to pierce the very soul, inducing a madness that could never be cured. As Kenzo's memories faded into the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all staring into the abyss, with the Kalindra's ghostly form waiting for them on the other side. As they lay there, their bodies racked with fever and their minds reeling with confusion, the group's conversations devolved into frantic, desperate whispers. "What's happening to us?" Akari moaned, her voice trembling with fear. Why can't I think straight? It's like my mind is unraveling," Hitomi stammered, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know what's real anymore." Tsukiko's voice was laced with panic. "We have to get out of here. We have to find shelter. This can't be just the desert's doing." Ryo's response was characteristically blunt. "We need to focus. We can't let our emotions cloud our judgment." But before anyone could respond, a strange, unsettling calm washed over them. The fever broke, their minds cleared, and they slowly sat up, looking around in confusion. What just happened?" Mei asked, her voice shaking slightly. Koki's eyes were wide with fear. "I don't know, but I don't like it. This feels wrong." Kenzo, however, was not responding. He lay there, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance, his expression grim. "Kenzo." Tsukiko called out, shaking him gently. "Kenzo, can you hear me?" But Kenzo didn't respond. His eyes seemed to glaze over, and he whispered, "It's the Kalindra, it's coming for us." As he spoke, his body began to fade away, sucked into some unseen abyss. The group watched in horror as Kenzo disappeared, leaving behind only a faint, shimmering outline of his form. "Damn it, no. No, no, no," Tsukiko muttered, her voice trembling with fear and frustration. She cursed under her breath, her eyes wide with panic. "What's happening? What's going on?" The others stared at her, equally shocked and frightened, as they struggled to comprehend the surreal horror unfolding before them. Kenzo's eyes fluttered open, and he was met with the familiar sight of his spacious bedroom. The soft, golden light of dawn streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the plush carpet and the wide, comfortable bed. He stretched, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It had all been a dream, he thought. The mirror realm, the desert, his companions, all just a product of his vivid imagination. As he swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet dangling in the air, he felt a sense of normalcy return. He was back in his own world, back in his own life. The life his father had planned out for him. Kenzo's thoughts were a mix of emotions as he began his daily routine. He showered, dressed, and made his way downstairs to the kitchen, where his mother had already prepared breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and toasted bread filled the air, and Kenzo's stomach growled in anticipation. "Good morning, Kenzo," his mother said, smiling as she handed him a cup of coffee. Your father is waiting for you in the study. He wants to discuss the business. Kenzo nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. This was his life now. He had given up on his dreams of adventure and exploration, accepting his role as the future leader of his family's business. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was what was expected of him. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Kenzo settled into his routine. He attended meetings, made deals, and slowly but surely, he began to accept his fate. He was a marionette, dancing on the strings of his father's expectations, but he was determined to make the best of it. And then, one day, he met her. Her name was Imiko, and she was beautiful, smart, and kind. They met at a business dinner, and Kenzo was immediately smitten. They talked for hours, laughing and joking, and Kenzo felt a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. As the months passed, Kenzo and Imiko grew closer. They fell in love, and Kenzo finally felt like he had found his place in the world. They got married, had a child, and built a life together. Kenzo's father was overjoyed, seeing his son finally settle down and take his rightful place as the head of the family business. Years went by, and Kenzo's life was filled with happiness and purpose. He and Imiko built a beautiful home, raised their child, and grew old together. They had their ups and downs, like any couple, but their love for each other only grew stronger. But as Kenzo sat on the beach, watching the sunset with Imiko and their child, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was as if he was living in a dream that was too perfect, too happy. And then, in an instant, it was all taken away. Imiko and their child were ripped from his arms, torn away by some unseen force. Kenzo screamed, begged, and pleaded, but it was too late. They were gone, and he was left alone, surrounded by the shattered remains of his perfect life. Kenzo's world went dark, his eyes snapped open, and he was met with the blinding glare of the desert sun. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy, as if it was anchored to the sand. He looked around, but there was nothing. No Imiko, no child, no life. Just the endless dunes, stretching out before him like a grave. As he struggled to comprehend what had happened, Kenzo's mind began to unravel. He thought of Imiko, of their child, of the life they had built together. But it was all a lie. A fabrication. A dream. Kenzo's face contorted in a mixture of pain and confusion. He screamed. But his voice was lost in the vast expanse of the desert. He screamed again, and again, until his voice was hoarse and his throat was raw. As he lay there, Kenzo's mind began to break. He thought of all the memories he had made with Imiko, of all the laughter they had shared, of all the tears they had dried together. But it was all a lie. A cruel, heartless lie. Kenzo's body began to convulse, his muscles contracting and releasing in violent spasms. He felt his mind slipping away, felt himself being pulled down into a vortex of madness. And then, he saw it. A figure, standing in the distance. A figure that looked like Imiko, but wasn't. A figure that smiled at him, but with a smile that was not quite right. Kenzo's eyes widened in horror as the figure began to walk towards him. He tried to scream, but his voice was gone. He tried to move, but his body was paralyzed. The figure loomed over him, its smile growing wider and wider. Kenzo's mind shattered, his sanity broken by the realization that he was trapped 7 Lily in a cage. Ori no Naka no Yuri, Chapter 13, The Dunes of Madden. 14.13%. As the figure reached out to touch him, Kenzo's world went black. But the darkness was not peaceful. It was a darkness filled with the screams of his own mind, a darkness that would haunt him for eternity. The last thing Kenzo saw was the figure's face, its smile twisted and grotesque. And then, there was nothing. Chapter 14, The Darkness That Devours. The others stared in shock as Kenzo suddenly reappeared before them, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed to transcend the boundaries of sanity. Ryo's voice was laced with concern as he took a step forward. Kenzo, what's wrong? What did you see? Kenzo's gaze darted wildly between his companions, his eyes lingering on each face as if searching for something or someone. His movements became increasingly erratic, his head twitching and jerking as if he was trying to shake off some unseen force. No. No. No, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Tsukiko's voice was tinged with alarm. Kenzo, snap out of it. What's happening to you? But Kenzo didn't respond. He simply turned and began to run, his feet pounding the sand as he disappeared into the distance. The others gave chase, their shouts and screams echoing through the desert air. Kenzo, come back. Kenzo, wait. But Kenzo was beyond reason. He was consumed by a madness that drove him forward, fueled by a terror that threatened to consume him whole. As he ran, the world around him began to distort and blur, the dunes melting into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. And then, everything went black. Kenzo's mind was plunged into a darkness that seemed to have a life of its own. The darkness was a living, breathing entity that wrapped itself around his mind, squeezing tight like a vice. He felt his sanity slipping away, felt his grip on reality falter. In the darkness, Kenzo saw visions of his past, of his life with Emiko and their child. But the visions were twisted, distorted, and wrong. Emiko's smile was a grotesque grimace, and their child's laughter was a menacing cackle. Kenzo's mind recoiled in horror as he realized that his memories were being manipulated, twisted, and distorted. He was trapped in a never-ending nightmare, a labyrinth of his own mind. As he struggled to escape, Kenzo felt his body begin to change. His limbs stretched and contorted, his skin crawling with an otherworldly energy. He felt his face elongate, his eyes bulge, and his mouth twist into a macabre grin. The darkness seemed to be transforming him, mutating him into a creature that was no longer human. Kenzo's screams were drowned out by the sound of his own mind shattering, his sanity broken by the realization that he was no longer in control. The last thing Kenzo saw was the figure's face, its smile twisted and grotesque. The figure leaned in close, its breath cold and rank, and whispered a single word in Kenzo's mind. As the word echoed through Kenzo's mind, the darkness closed in, and he was consumed by an eternal, abyssal void. The void was a place where time had no meaning, where the laws of reality were twisted and distorted. In the void, Kenzo was trapped, forever doomed to relive the same twisted memories, the same distorted visions. He was a prisoner of his own mind, a puppet controlled by the sinister forces that lurked in the shadows. The void was a place where hope was lost, where sanity was shattered, and where the human soul was reduced to a mere whisper of its former self. Kenzo was trapped in this void, forever doomed to suffer, forever trapped in a living hell of his own mind. And in the distance, the figure watched, its twisted smile growing wider as it whispered a single phrase, over and over, like a mantra: the Calendra's power is absolute, its control is total, and its victims are forever mine. As Kenzo disappeared into the distance, the group exchanged worried glances. Ryo's eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. "We need to be cautious," he warned, his voice low and even. "We don't know what's going on with him." Mei nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning the surrounding dunes. "Ryo's right. We can't just assume he's okay." Tsukiko frowned, her brow furrowed with concern. "But we have to try and help him. We can't just leave him out there." Akari's voice was laced with uncertainty. "Ryo, how can you just decide to attack him? We've come to know each other, we're friends." Ryo's expression was cold, unyielding. "Friends," he repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "We were thrown into this situation by chance, Akari. We're not friends. We're just people who happen to be stuck together." Akari's eyes widened, hurt flickering across her face. "That's not true, Ryo. We've been through so much together." Ryo's interruption was brutal. "I don't have time for sentiment, Akari. We need to focus on survival. And if Kenzo's become a threat, then we need to be prepared to defend ourselves." The group fell silent, the only sound the soft whisper of the wind through the dunes. Mel's voice broke the silence, her tone firm. "Ryo's right. We need to be prepared for anything. Let's go after Kenzo, but we need to be cautious." As they set off in pursuit of Kenzo, the atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken doubts and fears. Ryo led the way, his sword at the ready, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Kenzo. The sun beat down on them, the heat oppressive, the dunes stretching out before them like an endless sea. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing through the stillness, their hearts heavy with foreboding. And then, without warning, Kenzo's scream pierced the air, a sound that sent shivers down their spines. The group froze, their eyes locked on the dune ahead, where Kenzo's figure had appeared. He was running towards them, his eyes wild, his face twisted in a grimace of terror. "No." Movements erratic. "No," he muttered, his words incoherent, his. Ryo's grip on his sword tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Get ready," he warned, his voice low and deadly. The group prepared to defend themselves, their hearts pounding in their chests, their senses on high alert. They knew that something was wrong, that Kenzo was no longer the person they thought they knew. And as Kenzo stumbled towards them, his eyes fixed on some unseen horror, they realized that they were facing a threat that was far more sinister than they could have ever imagined. The air was electric with tension as Ryo raised his hand, unleashing a wave of dark magic that sought to block Kenzo's senses. But to their surprise, Kenzo didn't even flinch. His eyes, once bright and full of life, now burned with an otherworldly intensity, as if the Calindra's power had awakened a deep well of madness within him. Tsukiko, ever the warrior, charged forward with a fierce battle cry. Her scimitar flashed in the sunlight, its blade a blur of steel and death. She was the fastest and strongest in the group, and she intended to take Kenzo down with her trademark swordsmanship. With a few swift strides, Tsukiko closed the distance between herself and Kenzo. Her acrobatics trait allowed her to leap and weave between the dunes, her movements a fluid dance of steel and shadow. She struck at Kenzo with a series of swift, precise blows, each one aimed at a different weak point in his defenses. But Kenzo was no pushover. His craft skill allowed him to conjure swords out of thin air, and he used them to deflect Tsukiko's scimitar strikes with ease. The sound of clashing steel echoed through the dunes, the two combatants exchanging blow for blow in a deadly dance. Ryo, meanwhile, had been charging up his lesser necromancy trait. He had been saving it for a moment like this, when the stakes were high and the enemy was powerful. With a swift gesture, he summoned the undead remnants of the Krails and Malasters they had killed during their training. The undead creatures shambled forward, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. But Kenzo was unfazed. With a wave of his hand, he conjured a sword that sliced through the undead horde like a hot knife through butter. Mei, not to be outdone, unleashed her dark flames upon Kenzo. The fire raged and roared, casting flickering shadows across the dunes. But Kenzo simply laughed, his eyes burning with an inner fire that seemed to fuel his strength. Koki, meanwhile, had been trying to use his moon whisper trait to weaken Kenzo. But the moon's light was weak and distant, and his powers were greatly diminished. He could only watch in horror as his friends fell, one by one, to Kenzo's relentless onslaught. Akari, desperate to turn the tide, used her speed boost trait to accelerate Ryo and Mei's movements. But even with their newfound speed, they were no match for Kenzo's amplified strength. One by one, the group fell to the ground, their bodies battered and bruised. Tsukiko's scimitar lay broken and twisted, her arm shattered by Kenzo's relentless assault. Ryo's dark magic had been exhausted, his lesser necromancy trait spent. Mei's dark flames had been extinguished, her strength waning. As the last of their consciousness faded, as the group lay on the ground, battered and bruised, they felt their consciousness slipping away. Kenzo's relentless assault had taken its toll, and they were powerless to resist. Just as all hope seemed lost, a figure appeared on the horizon. She was a woman with long, dark hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall of night. Her eyes were a piercing blue, shining like sapphires in the sunlight. Her skin was a radiant, porcelain-like complexion, with a subtle sheen that hinted at a magical heritage. But it was the delicate, shimmering scales that covered her arms and torso that truly set her apart. They were a soft, iridescent blue, like the gentle glow of a moonlit lake, and they seemed to shift and shimmer as she moved. Her features were finely chiseled, with high cheekbones and a determined jawline. She was a vision of loveliness, yet their authority that surrounded her like a mantle. An aura of quiet power and as she approached, the group saw that she was dressed in a flowing white robe, cinched at the waist with a delicate silver belt. The robe seemed to glow with a soft, ethereal light, and the scales on her arms and torso seemed to pulse with a gentle, magical energy. Despite the danger that surrounded them, the group couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder and awe in the presence of this mysterious woman. "Leave them alone, Calindra," she said, her voice firm and commanding, yet musical and melodious. "They are under my protection now." The group's eyes fluttered open, and they saw Kenzo's twisted form hesitate for a moment. The woman's scales seemed to glow with an otherworldly energy, and her presence seemed to fill the air with an electric tension. "Who are you?" Ryo whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman's gaze fell upon him, and she smiled. "I am Lyra," she said. "And I have come to rescue you from the Calindra's grasp." As she spoke, Lyra raised her hand, and a blast of energy shot towards Kenzo. He stumbled backwards, his eyes flashing with anger, but Lyra stood firm. Lily in a cage, Ori no Naka no / chapter Darkness that 15.21% I still draw breath. The group's eyes began to droop, their consciousness slipping away. But Lyra's words seemed to echo in their minds, a beacon of hope in the darkness. "Hold on," she said, her voice urgent. "I will get you out of here. Just hold on." As the group's vision faded to black, they felt Lyra's hands grasping for them, pulling them towards safety. They were unsure if they would survive, but they knew that Lyra was their only hope. Chapter 15, A Haven in the Dunes. The air was electric with tension as Lyra faced off against the Kalindra, possessed Kenzo. The desert sand swirled around them, caught in the vortex of their impending clash. Lyra's eyes blazed with determination, her hands weaving intricate patterns as she began to chant in a strange language, Zalakai Karalu, Therosa Kraga. Water's fury, endure the earth's wrath. As she spoke, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The earth responded to her call, erupting in a series of jagged stone spikes that shot towards Kenzo like spears. The Kalindra, however, was not caught off guard. With a swift gesture, Kenzo's hands, now mere puppets of the Kalindra's will, crafted a pair of gleaming silver swords. The blades shimmered with an otherworldly energy, imbued with the Kalindra's dark magic. The swords danced in the air, weaving a complex pattern of defense as Lyra unleashed a maelstrom of wind and sand magic. The gusts howled like a chorus of the damned, threatening to consume Kenzo whole. But the Kalindra's enchantments held strong, the swords slicing through the tempests with ease. Lyra's breathing grew ragged, her cardiomaggia dwindling with each passing moment. She knew she couldn't sustain this pace for much longer. With a fierce cry, she summoned the last vestiges of her strength and chanted once more. Akarai Thalaki, Korvu Zalakai. Oasis's heart, free the water's cage. The words seemed to shatter the air itself, releasing a blast of energy that struck Kenzo with incredible force. The Kalindra's hold on his body wavered, its dark magic recoiling in disarray. Lyra's spell had done its work, Kenzo's eyes flickered, and he stumbled backwards, the Kalindra's influence broken. As the Kalindra's control faltered, Kenzo's body crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The silver swords, now bereft of their dark enchantments, clattered harmlessly to the sand. Lyra stood over him, her chest heaving with exhaustion, her eyes locked on the still form of the boy. The desert sands, sensing the shift in the balance of power, slowly began to settle, their swirling dance ceasing as the fight came to an end. As the group slowly regained consciousness, the air was thick with the weight of their collective grogginess. Ryo's hands instinctively rose to his head, as if to physically contain the throbbing ache that threatened to shatter his skull. His entire body, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, protested with a cacophony of pain. The aftermath of unleashing his cardiomaggia in such reckless abandon was a brutal reckoning. The others stirred, their faces etched with similar expressions of discomfort. Akari, her voice trembling, was the first to break the silence. Where are we? Her eyes darted wildly, taking in their surroundings. They found themselves in a cozy, shelter-like structure that resembled a rustic home. The walls, crafted from natural stone and earthy timber, seemed to exude a warm, comforting aura. A soft, golden light spilled in through the windows, casting a gentle glow over the group. As the others sat up, their gazes followed Akari's, drinking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Hitomi's eyes widened in wonder, while Mei's expression remained inscrutable, her gaze scanning the room with a detached air. Koki's brow furrowed in concern, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for any sign of danger. Ryo's attention, however, was drawn to the figure lying beside them. Kenzo, still unconscious, was a stark reminder of the events that had led to their current predicament. Ryo's mind racing, he recalled the mysterious, human-like woman who had rescued them. Lyra, an enigma, a savior, or something more. Her origins, her motivations, and her very nature remained a mystery. Ryo's thoughts swirled with questions, but one stood paramount: what was Lyra, truly? As the group continued to take stock of their surroundings, Tsukiko's voice, laced with a quiet determination, cut through the silence. We need to focus. We don't know where we are, or how we got here. But we do know one thing: we're not alone. Her gaze swept the room, as if daring any hidden dangers to reveal themselves. We need to be prepared, for anything. Lyra pushed aside the woven curtain that served as the shelter's entrance, her eyes gleaming with a warm intensity as she stepped inside. The soft light of the setting sun spilled in behind her, illuminating the quiet space where the group lay resting. Her gaze swept over them, taking in their various states of recovery, before coming to rest on Ryo's calm, collected face. I'm glad to see you're all recovering well, she said, her voice gentle. I'm afraid I had to intervene to save Kenzo from the Kalindra's grasp. It was a fierce battle, but in the end, I emerged victorious. As Lyra explained how she had defeated the Kalindra and saved Kenzo, the group listened intently, their faces a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Mei's eyes narrowed, her voice laced with skepticism. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? You just happened to be there, at the right moment, to save us. Hitomi nodded in agreement. We're grateful, of course, but it does seem a bit convenient. What were you doing out here, anyway? Lyra's smile never wavered. I was on patrol, scouting the surrounding area for any signs of threats to our village. As an Aetherion, it's my duty to protect our home and our people. I sensed a foreign energy, a presence. That didn't belong in our realm. I followed it, and it led me to you. Ryo's expression remained neutral, his voice flat. What village? Lyra's smile grew wider. Come, I'll show you. She gestured for the group to follow her, leading them outside the shelter. As they emerged into the bright sunlight, the group's eyes widened in wonder. Before them lay a stunning oasis, a lush haven in the midst of the desert's vast expanse. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling softly. A crystal, clear spring bubbled up from the earth, its source and destination unknown. Just then, a figure appeared at the edge of the oasis, walking towards them with a purposeful stride. As she drew closer, Lyra's face lit up with a warm smile. Ah, Kaidera. I'm glad you're here. I was just explaining to our new friends how I came to rescue them. Kaidera's eyes scanned the group, her gaze lingering on each face before coming to rest on Lyra. Are you okay, Lyra? I sensed a disturbance in the energy, and I was worried about you. Lyra nodded, her expression serene. I'm fine, Kaidera. Just a bit worn. Out from the battle. But our guests here are safe, thanks to the gods. Ryo's gaze remained fixed on Lyra, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask any questions, nor did he show any emotion. He simply observed, taking in the scene before him. As Ryo observed the two individuals conversing, their familiarity with each other was palpable. The shimmering scales that adorned their arms and torso caught his eye, a mesmerizing sight that seemed almost otherworldly. He knew, without a doubt, that they weren't human. The woman's mention of being an Aetherion had piqued his interest, and he found himself drawn to the mystery surrounding these creatures. Lyra, what is this place? Ryo asked. His voice low and measured, as he gazed out at the sprawling village. The homes, crafted from a combination of natural stone and woven fibers, seemed to blend seamlessly into the desert landscape. Each dwelling was a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the Aetherions, who had adapted to the harsh environment in ways both fascinating and unfamiliar. The others gathered around, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and wonder. How can people live here? May asked, her eyes scanning the endless dunes. It's so barren. Lyra's smile was warm and inviting. We are not just people, my friends. We are Aetherions, born of the desert and nurtured by its power. Our community, Aridia, has thrived in this world for generations, long before the arrival of otherworlders. As she spoke, Lyra's gaze swept across the village, her eyes lingering on the intricate patterns of scales that adorned the buildings. You see, we Aetherions are aware of the humans who are not born from Cardia Magia. We know of the other world, and the ones who come from it. But here, in Aridia, we have created a home, a community that is uniquely our own. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming cacti, and the soft rustle of the wind through the dunes. As Ryo listened to Lyra's words, he began to grasp the depth of the Aetherions' connection to the desert. It was a bond that went beyond mere survival, a symbiotic relationship that had allowed them to flourish in one of the harshest environments imaginable. What do you mean, born of the desert? Hitomi asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Lyra's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. Ah, that is a story for another time, but rest assured, my friend, you will learn much more about our world and our place within it during your stay in Aridia.
A special thanks to everyone who donated. You've helped me more than you know. I'll keep working on bringing more audiobooks. If you'd like to support further, you can become a member or donate, and you will get a link to the audiobook library. The links are in my bio and description. You can also download the audio files directly from the library. Making videos takes a bit more time because of rendering, but I'll keep pushing forward. Once again, thank you for listening to Light Verse Recap,